The envelope landed on Claire Whitmore's kitchen counter, with a soft, deceptive gentleness, as if it did not contain a weapon disguised as an invitation. She had just returned from a double shift at the hospital, her feet aching, her mind still replaying a patient's chart, when she saw the cream-colored paper with gold trim sitting beside her mail. She knew the handwriting before she even touched it. Melissa's handwriting always slanted to the right with too much flourish, as though every letter wanted to be noticed. Claire opened it slowly, already sensing something was wrong. Her sister rarely wrote anything by hand unless it mattered to her image. Inside, the card read like a formal announcement rather than a warm invitation. Melissa was getting married in 6 weeks to a man named David Langford, a name Claire did not recognize, and beneath the elegant script was a handwritten note that made her stomach tighten. Claire, I want you there. You deserve to see what real love looks like. Maybe it will inspire you to finally find your own. She read it twice, then a third time, searching for warmth that was not there. The words were polite on the surface, cruel underneath, exactly the way Melissa had spoken to her their entire lives. Claire set the card down on the counter and stared at it for a long moment, feeling something she had felt many times before but had never quite learned to name. It was not sadness exactly. It was the tired ache of being underestimated by the person who should have known her best. She was 34 years old, a senior nurse at Ashford General Hospital, respected by her colleagues, admired by her patients, and yet within her own family, she had become a symbol of failure simply because she had never married. It did not matter that she owned her small house outright, that she had put herself through nursing school with no help from anyone, that she had once given up a promising scholarship abroad so she could stay behind and care for their ailing father during his final years. None of that seemed to count in the eyes of her mother or her younger sister. All that counted, apparently, was a ring on her finger. Claire poured herself a glass of water and sat at her small kitchen table, looking out at the darkening street. She thought about calling her mother to ask about the wedding, but she already knew how that conversation would go. Her mother, Linda Whitmore, had a way of turning every conversation about Melissa into a subtle comparison with Claire, always favoring the daughter who fit neatly into the picture of a traditional life. She remembered the last family dinner 3 months earlier, when her mother had casually mentioned in front of the extended family that Melissa was finally settling down properly, followed by a pointed glance in Claire's direction. Nobody said anything cruel outright. It was never that obvious. It was always wrapped in soft, socially acceptable language that left Claire smiling politely, while something inside her quietly closed a little more. Her phone buzzed on the table. It was a text from her cousin Diane, who had always been kind to her in a family that often was not. "Did you get the invitation? Please tell me you're not actually going. You know how she gets." Claire typed back slowly. "I got it. I'm still deciding." "Claire, we both know Melissa doesn't invite you out of love. She invites you so everyone can see the difference between you two. Don't give her that stage." Claire stared at the screen for a long time before responding. "Maybe that's exactly why I should go." She did not fully understand her own answer yet, but something in her refused to let her sister's cruelty dictate her choices. She had spent years shrinking herself at family gatherings, laughing along with jokes that were not really jokes, nodding through comments meant to remind her of her supposed shortcomings. She was tired of it, but she was even more tired of running from it. The next morning, Claire drove to see her mother, mostly because she needed to hear the truth from someone who might slip and reveal what was really going on behind the invitation. Linda Whitmore lived in a modest but well-kept house on the edge of town, the same house where Claire and Melissa had grown up, filled with photographs that told a very selective story of the family. Claire noticed, as she always did, that most of the photos on the wall featured Melissa in various stages of triumph. Her graduation, her first job, her engagement photos, already framed and displayed proudly near the entrance. "Claire, sweetheart, you look tired," her mother said as she opened the door, her eyes scanning her daughter's face, the way a critic might scan a painting for flaws. "Long shift," Claire replied simply, stepping inside. They sat in the living room, and within minutes, the conversation turned, unsurprisingly, to the wedding. Linda's voice softened into the tone she reserved only for topics involving Melissa's happiness. "She's marrying such a wonderful man, Claire. David comes from a good family. He owns a growing logistics company. Can you imagine? Your sister will want for nothing." Claire nodded, saying little, letting her mother talk. It was easier that way. Linda eventually paused and studied her daughter with a look that Claire recognized instantly, the look of a woman preparing to say something delicate under the guise of concern. "I hope you're not upset about the wedding invitation. Melissa really does want you there. She just worries about you sometimes." "Worries about me?" Claire repeated, keeping her voice even. "You know, about being alone. She doesn't want you to feel left behind while everyone else moves forward." Claire felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the same sensation she had felt so many times growing up whenever her sister's success was framed as a gentle warning about her own perceived failure. She took a breath and chose her words carefully, unwilling to give her mother the reaction she seemed to be waiting for. "I'm not left behind, Mom. I built a life I'm proud of. It just doesn't look like Melissa's life, and that's fine." Linda's expression flickered, something between surprise and mild discomfort, as if she had expected Claire to accept the framing without pushing back. She quickly changed the subject to the wedding venue, describing it as though it were a palace rising out of the countryside, and Claire simply listened, filing away every detail, every subtle jab disguised as motherly concern. Later that evening, Claire sat alone in her home office, going through old photographs from her childhood, trying to understand when exactly this dynamic had taken root. She found a photo of herself at 17, standing beside her father in front of their old house, both of them smiling in a way that felt genuine rather than performed. Her father had been the one person who never compared her to Melissa, who had told her once, quietly, that strength did not always look loud or obvious. She missed him deeply in that moment, missed the way he used to remind her that her worth was not something to be measured against anyone else's timeline. He had passed away 6 years earlier, and in some ways, Claire felt that his absence had removed the only shield she had against her mother's quiet favoritism. The following week, Claire attended a small gathering at her Aunt Carol's house, where several relatives had already begun discussing the wedding, with the kind of enthusiasm reserved for royal events. Claire arrived a little late, still in her work clothes, and immediately felt the shift in the room as conversations paused briefly before resuming in a slightly different tone. Her cousin Diane pulled her aside near the kitchen, speaking in a low voice. They were just talking about the wedding party. "Guess what role Melissa gave you?" Claire raised an eyebrow. "I'm almost afraid to ask." "She wants you to give a toast about waiting for the right person." Her words, not mine. Claire let out a short, humorless laugh, shaking her head. "Of course she does." "You don't have to do it," Diane said gently. "You don't have to go along with any of this." Claire thought for a long moment, watching her aunt across the room, laughing loudly at something Melissa had apparently said, everyone leaning in as if she were the center of a private sun, around which the whole family orbited. She thought about years of being placed at the edges of gatherings, seated near the kitchen, referred to as the sister who works too hard, instead of by her actual accomplishments. "No," Claire finally said. "I think I will do it, just not the way she's expecting." Diane studied her curiously. "What does that mean?" Claire only smiled faintly, unwilling to explain further, mostly because she herself was still working out what it meant. She knew one thing clearly. She would not spend the rest of her life shrinking to make her sister feel bigger. If Melissa wanted a stage to display her success and Claire's supposed failure, then Claire would walk onto that stage with her head held high, refusing to play the wounded younger character in her sister's carefully written story. Over the next few days, Claire found herself thinking more about David Langford, the man Melissa was set to marry. Something about the name nagged at her memory, a faint familiarity she could not quite place. She searched for him briefly online, finding a professional profile describing him as the founder of a logistics company that had grown rapidly over the past 3 years. The photo showed a composed man in his mid-30s, dark-haired, calm eyes, nothing outwardly remarkable. Yet something about his story tugged gently at the edge of her memory. She dismissed the feeling as coincidence and focused instead on her work, throwing herself into extra shifts at the hospital, partly to distract herself and partly because she genuinely loved her job. Her patients did not care about wedding rings or family status. They cared about competent hands and a steady voice during their most frightened moments, and Claire had built a quiet, solid reputation doing exactly that. One afternoon, A new patient was brought into her ward, following a minor workplace accident. A young man who worked in logistics management, and mentioned, in passing conversation while Claire changed his bandage, that his company had recently been acquired by a growing firm called Langford Freight Solutions. Claire paused for a moment, the name settling strangely in her mind, but she said nothing, simply continuing her work with practiced calm. That night, driving home, she allowed herself to sit with the discomfort of not fully understanding why the name Langford felt like it belonged to more than just her sister's fiancé. She told herself it was likely nothing, a common name attached to a common business, and yet some quiet instinct told her the wedding ahead held more surprises than anyone in her family currently realized. As the weeks passed, invitations went out to extended family and friends, and Claire watched from a careful distance as Melissa transformed the wedding planning into a performance meant for an audience far larger than the two people actually getting married. Every detail was curated for appearances, from the flowers to the seating charts, and Claire began to notice her own name appearing on lists, in ways that felt deliberately unflattering, tucked near unmarried cousins and distant relatives instead of closer family. She said nothing publicly, choosing instead to observe quietly, gathering her own understanding of the situation, the way she gathered patient histories before a diagnosis, piece by piece, until the full picture became clear. She sensed that this wedding, meant to be Melissa's crowning moment, was going to reveal far more than her sister intended, and for the first time in years, Claire felt something other than quiet resignation settle into her chest. She felt ready. Not for revenge, not for cruelty in return, but for the simple, powerful act of finally standing in her own truth in front of the people who had spent years underestimating her. Whatever Melissa was planning, whatever performance she had scripted for her wedding day, Claire intended to walk into it exactly as herself, unshaken, unwilling to shrink, and quietly certain that the story her family thought they knew was about to change in ways none of them could yet imagine. A few days later, Claire received a phone call from Melissa herself, something rare enough that she almost did not recognize the ringtone she had assigned to her sister's number years earlier. She answered cautiously, bracing herself. "Claire, hi. Did you get the invitation?" Melissa's voice carried its usual bright, breezy tone, the kind that made every sentence sound like good news, even when it was not. "I did," Claire said. "Congratulations. I mean that. Thank you. I really want you there. It wouldn't feel right without my big sister watching me finally get my happy ending." There was a small pause, just long enough to feel intentional. "I know things haven't exactly gone that way for you, but maybe seeing a real wedding will help you figure out what you're doing wrong." Claire closed her eyes briefly, steadying her breath before responding. "I'll be there, Melissa. I'm happy for you." "Great. Oh, and I was thinking, since you're the older one, it might be nice if you said a few words at the reception. Something about patience. About waiting for the right time, even if it takes longer for some people than others." Melissa's laugh followed, light and airy, as though she had not just delivered another quiet insult wrapped in a request. "I'll think about what to say," Claire replied evenly, refusing to give her the reaction she was clearly hoping for. After the call ended, Claire sat with her phone in her hand for a long moment, staring at the blank screen. She thought about all the ways she could respond to a moment like this, all the sharp words she could have said, all the truths about her sister's own selfishness that she could have spoken aloud. Instead, she had chosen silence, not out of weakness, but because she had learned long ago that reacting to Melissa's jabs only fed them further. She thought back to their childhood, to a memory that had stayed with her for years. They had been at a family picnic, Claire 12 years old and Melissa 9, when Melissa had fallen from a low tree branch and scraped her knee badly. Claire had been the one to run for help, to calm her sister down, to hold her hand while their mother fussed over the wound. In that moment, Melissa had looked up at her with genuine gratitude, calling her the best sister in the world. Claire wondered when exactly that admiration had curdled into something closer to quiet resentment, as if Melissa had spent the years since trying to prove she no longer needed anyone's help, especially not Claire's. Perhaps it had started when their parents began comparing them without meaning to, praising Melissa's outgoing nature at every gathering, while quietly overlooking Claire's steadier, quieter strength. Perhaps it had started when Claire chose nursing school, instead of the more glamorous path their mother had once imagined for her daughters. Whatever the cause, The distance between the sisters had grown slowly over the years, disguised beneath surface-level politeness and forced smiles at holiday dinners. Claire drove to work the next morning with these thoughts still circling in her mind, but the moment she stepped into the hospital, her focus shifted entirely. She had 4 patients to check on before her morning rounds even officially began, and the demands of her job left little room for personal distraction. It was, in many ways, a relief. Here, in the quiet urgency of medical care, she was simply Nurse Whitmore, respected for her calm competence, valued for her steady hands and clear judgment. During her lunch break, she sat with her close friend and fellow nurse, Priya Anand, in the small break room overlooking the hospital courtyard. Priya had known Claire for nearly 8 years and had witnessed, secondhand, the slow erosion of her confidence whenever family gatherings approached. "You look like you're carrying something heavy," Priya said, sliding a cup of tea across the table. Claire exhaled, wrapping her hands around the warm cup. "My sister's wedding. She wants me to give a speech about patience and waiting for the right time." Priya raised an eyebrow. "That's not subtle." "It never is, not with her." Claire took a slow sip of tea, her eyes drifting toward the window. "I keep asking myself why I even care anymore. I have a good life. I love my work. I'm proud of what I've built. But somehow, one phone call from her, and I feel like that 12-year-old girl again, trying to prove I matter." Priya reached across the table, placing a reassuring hand over Claire's. "You do matter, Claire. And for what it's worth, I think you should go to that wedding, not to prove anything to her, but to remind yourself that you don't need her approval to feel whole." Claire nodded slowly, letting the words settle. She thought about how strange it was that the people who often understood her best were not blood relatives, but the friends and colleagues she had built genuine connections with over the years. Priya, Diane, a handful of others who saw her clearly, without the distorted lens of old family competition. That evening, Claire returned home to find another message waiting, this time from her mother, asking if she had decided what to wear to the wedding and reminding her, almost as an afterthought, that Melissa wanted the wedding party to look polished and put together. Claire read the message twice, noting the implication buried within it, the quiet suggestion that she might not naturally fit the image her sister wanted to present. She set her phone down and walked to her closet, pulling out a deep emerald dress she had bought for herself the previous year, simple, elegant, and entirely her own choice, rather than something selected to please anyone else. She held it up against herself in the mirror, studying her reflection for a long moment. She saw a woman who had survived long shifts, sleepless nights, the loss of a father, and years of quiet family pressure, and had still managed to build something solid and true. Whatever role her sister had scripted for her at this wedding, Claire decided in that quiet moment that she would not perform it. She would attend, she would smile, she would even offer a toast if pressed, but she would do so on her own terms, carrying herself with the same quiet strength that had carried her through every difficult year before this one. The wedding was still weeks away, but already Claire could feel something shifting inside her, a steady resolve settling into place, as though her own story was finally ready to be told, regardless of the narrative her family had tried to write for her. The seating chart arrived by email on a Tuesday morning, and Claire almost missed it entirely, between hospital notifications and pharmacy reminders. When she finally opened the attachment during her break, her stomach dropped in a way she had not expected, even after weeks of preparing herself for her sister's quiet cruelty. Her name sat at a table near the kitchen entrance, grouped with 3 distant cousins she barely knew, and an elderly great-uncle who was hard of hearing. Meanwhile, the head table gleamed with the names of Melissa's closest friends, her future in-laws, and a scattering of important business associates connected to David's growing company. Claire stared at the screen, feeling heat rise in her chest, not from embarrassment, but from the sheer transparency of the message being sent. She closed her laptop and walked to the hospital cafeteria, needing air and distance before she said or did anything she might regret. Priya found her there minutes later, still staring at her tea without drinking it. "What happened?" Priya asked, sliding into the seat across from her. "She sat me by the kitchen," Claire said flatly. "Kitchen table, like I'm an afterthought." Priya's expression tightened. "Claire, that's deliberate. You know that, right?" "Of course I know that," Claire replied, her voice quiet but firm. "Melissa doesn't do anything by accident. Every detail of this wedding has been engineered to remind everyone exactly where I stand in this family." Priya reached across the table, her voice gentle but insistent. "So, what are you going to do?" Claire finally looked up, something steady settling behind her eyes. "I'm going to show up anyway. Looking better than she expects. Behaving better than she expects. Because the moment I react, the way she wants me to, I hand her exactly what she's hoping for." That evening, Claire drove to her mother's house again, mostly because she needed to understand whether Linda had any part in this obvious slight. She found her mother in the kitchen, humming softly, while arranging fresh flowers Melissa had dropped off earlier that day, as a preview of the wedding centerpieces. "Mom, did you see the seating chart?" Claire asked, keeping her tone measured. Linda glanced up, a flicker of discomfort crossing her face before she smoothed it away. "I saw it. I'm sure Melissa just ran out of room at the main tables. Weddings are complicated, sweetheart." "I'm by the kitchen, Mom, next to Uncle Walter, who can't hear half of what anyone says." Linda sighed, setting down the flowers. "Claire, please don't make this bigger than it needs to be. It's her day. Let her have it exactly the way she wants it." Claire felt something settle heavily in her chest. Not surprise exactly, but a confirmation of something she had long suspected. Her mother would always choose peace over honesty when it came to protecting Melissa's comfort, even at the cost of acknowledging obvious unfairness toward her other daughter. "I'm not trying to take anything from her," Claire said quietly. "I just wanted you to see it too." Linda reached out, patting her daughter's hand in the same soft, dismissive way she always had. "You're too sensitive sometimes. Melissa loves you. She just shows it differently." Claire left her mother's house that evening, carrying the same familiar weight she always carried after these conversations, the quiet loneliness of being unseen by the person who was supposed to see her most clearly. She drove home slowly, watching the streetlights blur past her window, allowing herself a few private moments of sadness before she straightened her shoulders and reminded herself of the promise she had made only days earlier. She would not shrink. She would not disappear into the background, simply because her family had already decided where she belonged. The following weekend, Claire attended her cousin Diane's birthday gathering, a smaller, more relaxed event compared to the growing spectacle surrounding Melissa's wedding. Several relatives were present, and predictably, conversation soon turned toward wedding preparations. "I heard Melissa wants an ice sculpture at the reception," said Aunt Carol, laughing lightly. "An actual ice sculpture. Can you imagine the cost?" "She wants everything to look like something out of a magazine," Diane added, rolling her eyes slightly. "David's family has money, and I think she's determined to prove she belongs in that world." Claire listened quietly, sipping her drink, saying little. She had learned over the years that offering neutral silence often revealed more truth than direct questioning ever could. Sure enough, a distant cousin named Grace, who had always enjoyed stirring gentle chaos at family gatherings, leaned toward Claire with a knowing smile. "Did you see where she seated you? Kitchen table. I couldn't believe it when I saw the chart." Claire kept her expression calm. "I saw it. She told my mother she wanted the important people near the front," Grace continued, clearly enjoying the reaction she hoped to provoke. "I guess that tells you something." Claire offered a small, unreadable smile. "It tells me plenty." She excused herself shortly after, stepping outside onto Diane's back porch for a moment of quiet. The evening air was cool, the sky beginning to shift into soft shades of orange and purple. Diane joined her a few minutes later, closing the sliding door gently behind her. "You okay?" Diane asked. "I will be," Claire said. "I just needed a minute." Diane leaned against the porch railing, studying her cousin carefully. "You know, everyone sees what she's doing, Claire. Not just me. People notice these things, even if they don't say anything out loud." "That doesn't really help," Claire admitted quietly, knowing that people notice unfairness and choosing to stay silent about it anyway. "No," Diane agreed. "But it does mean you're not imagining things. Whatever happens at that wedding, you're not the only one paying attention." Claire considered those words for a long moment, feeling something settle inside her. Not comfort exactly, but a quiet steadiness. She was tired of being the only one who noticed her own mistreatment, tired of being told she was too sensitive or reading too much into simple mistakes. Diane's words, small as they were, offered a strange kind of validation she had been missing for years. Over the following days, Wedding preparations intensified. Melissa called frequently, mostly to discuss logistics, though each call seemed to carry another small, deliberate reminder of Claire's supposed shortcomings. During one particular conversation, Melissa casually mentioned that she had asked their cousin's husband to walk Claire down the aisle during the bridal party procession, since Claire didn't have anyone else to escort her. "I have colleagues, Melissa. I have friends who could easily walk with me," Claire replied evenly. "Oh, I just assumed, since you're single, it might be awkward for you otherwise," Melissa said breezily, as though she had done Claire a favor rather than delivered another quiet insult. Claire took a slow breath before responding. "That's thoughtful of you. I'll figure it out." After ending the call, Claire sat in silence for several minutes, feeling the familiar exhaustion that came from constantly managing her sister's subtle jabs without losing her composure. She thought about calling Priya, then decided instead to spend the evening alone, organizing her thoughts and reminding herself of her own accomplishments outside the shadow of her family's narrow expectations. She opened her laptop and began reviewing patient files for the following week, grounding herself in the work that had always given her a sense of purpose. As she worked, her mind occasionally drifted back to the strange, persistent feeling she had experienced weeks earlier regarding the name Langford. She searched briefly online again, this time finding a short interview David had given to a regional business magazine about the growth of his logistics company. In the interview, David mentioned, almost in passing, that his company's turning point had come 3 years earlier, when a mentor helped him restructure his failing operations during a period of serious financial difficulty. He described this mentor only as a brilliant strategist who saw potential in me when almost no one else did, without naming the person directly. Claire read the passage several times, feeling that same nagging familiarity return, stronger this time, though she still could not place why. She closed the article and reminded herself that coincidences happened often in a world full of overlapping industries and shared connections. Still, something about the timing, about David's rapid business turnaround exactly 3 years earlier, lingered in the back of her mind like an unfinished thought waiting patiently to resurface. The following week, Claire attended a mandatory work seminar focused on advanced patient care protocols, a rare break from the emotional weight of wedding preparations. During a lunch break at the seminar, she struck up a conversation with a hospital administrator named Nathan Ellery, a calm, thoughtful man she had crossed paths with occasionally over the years. "You seem distracted today," Nathan observed kindly, as they sat together in the seminar hall. "Family stuff," Claire admitted. "My younger sister is getting married soon." "That should be exciting," Nathan said. "It should be," Claire agreed, offering a faint smile. "It's complicated in my family, though." Nathan nodded understandingly, without pressing further, and their conversation shifted naturally toward safer topics, discussing hospital policy changes and shared professional experiences. Claire appreciated his easy, undemanding company, a welcome contrast to the tension simmering within her own family circle. As the seminar ended and Claire drove home that evening, she felt a small measure of calm return to her, a reminder that her life extended far beyond the narrow judgments of her mother and sister. She had built genuine friendships, a respected career, and a quiet sense of self-worth that no seating chart or dismissive phone call could fully diminish, no matter how hard Melissa seemed determined to try. Still, as the wedding date drew closer, Claire could not shake the growing sense that something larger than simple sibling rivalry was unfolding beneath the surface of these preparations. Between the strange familiarity surrounding David's name, her mother's persistent refusal to acknowledge unfairness, and Melissa's escalating attempts to diminish her in front of the extended family, Claire sensed that the wedding ahead would reveal far more than anyone currently anticipated, and she intended to walk into that day fully prepared for whatever truths might finally come to light. A few days after the seminar, Claire received an unexpected call from her grandmother, Margaret, who lived a few hours away and rarely involved herself in the day-to-day drama of the family. Margaret's voice, though aged, carried the same sharpness it always had, a clarity that seemed to cut straight through pretense. "I heard about the seating arrangement," Margaret said without preamble. Claire sat down slowly on her couch, surprised. "News travels fast." "It always does in this family," Margaret replied dryly. "I want you to know, Claire, that I see what's happening. I've seen it for years, The way your mother and sister treat you as though your worth depends on a wedding ring." Claire felt an unexpected tightness in her throat. "Thank you, Grandma. It means a lot to hear that." "I'm not calling just to comfort you," Margaret continued, her tone firm but not unkind. "I'm calling because I want you to remember something. You come from strong women, Claire. Women who built lives out of very little, and never once needed a husband's name to prove they mattered. Don't you dare shrink yourself at that wedding to make anyone else comfortable." Claire smiled despite herself, feeling a small surge of strength return to her chest. "I won't, Grandma, I promise." "Good," Margaret said simply. "Now, what are you wearing? Because I expect you to look like you own that room, not like you're apologizing for existing in it." Claire laughed, the sound genuine and warm, cutting through some of the heaviness that had settled over her in recent weeks. "I already have the dress picked out. Emerald green. Simple, but it fits me." "Perfect," Margaret said approvingly. "Wear it proudly." After the call ended, Claire sat quietly for several minutes, replaying her grandmother's words. It was rare that anyone in her family spoke so plainly about the imbalance she had endured for years, and hearing it acknowledged so directly gave her a renewed sense of clarity. She was not imagining the unfairness. She was not being overly sensitive. She was simply living within a family dynamic that had, for reasons she still did not fully understand, decided to measure her worth against a narrow and outdated standard. The following Monday, Claire returned to work with a lighter step, though the demands of her job quickly reclaimed her focus. She spent the morning assisting with a particularly difficult case involving an elderly patient recovering from surgery, and by midday, she found herself once again sharing lunch with Nathan Ellery, who had become an unexpectedly steady presence during the ongoing wedding chaos. "You seem a little brighter today," Nathan observed, unwrapping his sandwich. "My grandmother called," Claire said, smiling faintly. "She has a way of putting things into perspective." "Sounds like a good influence," Nathan replied. "She is," Claire agreed. "Unlike most of the rest of my family, she doesn't seem interested in comparing me to my sister." Nathan studied her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "For what it's worth, from what I've seen of you at work, you don't strike me as someone who needs comparing to anyone. You're excellent at what you do, Claire. Patients ask for you specifically. That says something." Claire felt a small warmth spread through her chest at the sincerity in his voice. "Thank you, Nathan. That actually means a lot right now." Their conversation shifted easily after that, discussing hospital updates and a new training program being introduced for senior staff. Claire appreciated how effortless it felt to talk with him, free from the underlying tension that colored so many of her family interactions. She found herself, without fully realizing it, looking forward to these small daily exchanges more than she had anticipated. That evening, Melissa called again, this time to discuss the rehearsal dinner, which was set to take place the night before the wedding. Claire answered cautiously, bracing herself for whatever new arrangement awaited her. "I wanted to let you know the rehearsal dinner seating," Melissa began. "I put you near David's business partners. I thought it might be good for you to meet some successful people. You know, expand your circle a little." Claire paused, unsure whether to feel insulted or simply exhausted by the constant undertone of judgment layered beneath every logistical detail. "That's fine, Melissa. Thank you for letting me know. I just want everything to go smoothly," Melissa continued. "This is such an important day for me, and I really do want you there, supporting me the way a good sister should." Claire closed her eyes briefly, steadying her voice before responding. "I'll be there, Melissa, supporting you." After ending the call, Claire sat in silence, staring at her ceiling, feeling the weight of the coming weeks settle heavily over her. She thought about her grandmother's words, about Diane's quiet support, about Priya's steady friendship, and about the strange, persistent instinct pulling at the edges of her mind whenever she thought about the name Langford. Each thread felt disconnected from the others, yet Claire sensed, with a certainty she could not fully explain, that they were all quietly weaving towards something significant, something that would unfold entirely on the day her sister had chosen for her grand celebration. She reminded herself, as she had promised her grandmother, that she would not shrink. Whatever awaited her at that wedding, whatever fresh humiliation Melissa believed she was orchestrating, Claire intended to walk into that day exactly as herself, steady, capable, and quietly unshakable, trusting that the truth, in its own time, always found a way to reveal itself. Before going to bed that night, Claire pulled out an old shoebox from her closet, one filled with letters and cards her father had written her over the years. She found one from her nursing school graduation, the ink slightly faded, and read it slowly by lamplight. He had written that true success was never loud, that the quietest people in a room were often the strongest, and that she should never let anyone convince her that her path mattered less simply because it looked different from everyone else's. Claire held the card against her chest for a long moment, feeling steadied by his words even years after he had spoken them for the last time. She placed the card carefully back in the box, turned off the light, and allowed herself, finally, to fall asleep with a calm certainty that whatever came next, she would meet it standing tall. The bridal shop smelled of lavender and fresh fabric, but the tension inside felt sharp enough to cut through the sweetness entirely. Claire stood in front of the tall mirror, staring at the bridesmaid dress she had just been handed, a shade of mustard yellow that clashed noticeably against her skin tone, unlike the soft rose gold chosen for the other bridesmaids. "This isn't the same color as everyone else's," Claire said carefully, holding the dress up against herself. Melissa, seated on a small velvet chair sipping champagne with two of her closest friends, waved a hand dismissively. "I thought it would be nice for you to stand out a little, since you're the maid of honor's older sister. It sets you apart." Claire glanced toward the two friends, who exchanged a quick, knowing look before quickly averting their eyes. She understood immediately that this was not an oversight. It was another carefully placed detail meant to make her feel separate, different, less polished than the rest of the wedding party. "I appreciate the thought," Claire said evenly, refusing to give her sister the reaction she seemed to be waiting for. "But I'd prefer to match the others, if that's an option." Melissa's smile tightened slightly. "There isn't time to change it now. The order's already been placed." Claire held the dress a moment longer, before handing it back to the shop assistant, an older woman named Judith, who had been quietly observing the exchange, with a look of visible discomfort. "I'll take it as is," Claire said calmly. "Thank you." As she stepped into the fitting room, she caught a glimpse of her own expression in the mirror, steady, despite the quiet sting she felt inside. She reminded herself of her grandmother's words, of the promise she had made to walk into every moment of this wedding, without shrinking. The dress was simply fabric. It did not define her worth, no matter how deliberately her sister had chosen it. When she emerged from the fitting room, one of Melissa's friends, a woman named Kayla, offered a tight, awkward smile. "You look nice, actually. The color works better than I expected." "Thank you," Claire replied simply, choosing not to acknowledge the subtle surprise buried within the compliment. Judith, the shop assistant, approached Claire quietly, while Melissa was distracted discussing final alterations with her friends. "You handled that with real grace," Judith said softly. "I've worked in this shop for many years, and I've seen plenty of difficult brides. But that was something else entirely." Claire offered a small, appreciative smile. "Thank you for noticing." "For what it's worth," Judith added, glancing briefly toward Melissa. "Some people never learn how good they have it until they lose the people who quietly hold everything together." Claire considered those words carefully as she gathered her things to leave, feeling a small, unexpected comfort in the observation of a stranger who had no personal stake in her family's dynamics, yet had seen clearly what continued to unfold in front of her. Later that week, Claire attended a family lunch organized by her mother, meant to finalize a few remaining wedding details. The gathering included several extended relatives, and predictably, conversation soon shifted toward comments about Claire's single status, delivered with the same casual cruelty, disguised as concern that had followed her for years. "You know, Claire, there's still time," said her Aunt Carol, patting her hand gently. "Plenty of women find someone later in life." "I'm not in a hurry, Aunt Carol," Claire replied politely. "I'm happy with my life as it is." "Of course, dear," Carol said, though her tone carried an unmistakable note of pity. "It's just, well, watching Melissa marry so beautifully, I imagine it must be a little difficult for you." Claire kept her expression calm, though she felt the familiar tightening return to her chest. "I'm genuinely happy for her," she said simply. "That's all that matters today." Across the table, Melissa smiled faintly, clearly enjoying the exchange without needing to say a single word herself. Claire noticed this small, satisfied expression and felt something shift within her, not anger exactly, but a quiet, clarifying resolve. She excused herself from the table shortly after, stepping outside for a moment of fresh air. Diane followed her out a few minutes later, her expression sympathetic. "That was rough in there." "It's fine," Claire said, though her voice carried a slight edge of exhaustion. "I'm used to it." "You shouldn't have to be used to it," Diane replied firmly. "Claire, I've been thinking about something. You remember David's company, the one Melissa keeps bragging about? I did a little digging out of curiosity, and something about the timeline seemed familiar to me." Claire turned toward her cousin, suddenly alert. "What do you mean?" "A few years ago, there was a small local news piece about a young entrepreneur whose logistics company nearly collapsed before an anonymous consultant helped restructure the entire operation. I remember reading it because it mentioned Ashford General Hospital in passing, something about the consultant working closely with hospital administration on efficiency planning before pivoting to help small businesses. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now that I think about it, doesn't that sound a lot like something you might have been involved with a few years back?" Claire felt a slow, uneasy recognition settle over her. Several years earlier, during a period of personal financial strain following their father's medical expenses, Claire had taken on a brief consulting role outside her nursing work, helping small, struggling businesses streamline their logistics and staffing efficiency, drawing on skills she had developed managing hospital resources under tight budget constraints. She had worked anonymously through a local business support organization, never publicly connected to the companies she assisted, largely because she preferred to keep her nursing career and consulting work separate. "I did do something like that," Claire admitted slowly. "A logistics company, struggling badly, close to shutting down completely. I helped them restructure their staffing and delivery systems. It was anonymous, though. I never met the owner directly. Everything was coordinated through the support organization." Diane's eyes widened slightly. "Claire, what if that was David's company?" Claire felt a strange mixture of disbelief and quiet unease settle over her. "It's possible, I suppose. But there's no way to know for certain without more information." "Maybe you should find out," Diane suggested carefully. "Before the wedding, not after." Claire considered this for a long moment, torn between curiosity and a reluctance to disrupt an already tense situation further. "If it is him, Melissa doesn't know anything about it, and if I bring it up now, it could look like I'm trying to insert myself into her spotlight. Or," Diane countered gently, "it could reveal something Melissa desperately needs to understand about the sister she's been dismissing for years." Claire did not respond immediately, her mind turning over the possibilities. She thought about David's brief mention in the business magazine interview, the vague reference to a mentor who had helped him during his lowest point. She thought about the persistent, nagging familiarity she had felt each time his name appeared in conversation. Slowly, quietly, pieces were beginning to align into a picture she had not expected. That evening, Claire returned home and pulled out an old folder from her filing cabinet, one containing records from her brief consulting period years earlier. She sifted through documents until she found a name she had not thought about in years, listed simply as the primary contact for the logistics company she had once helped restructure. The name on the page was David Langford. Claire sat back slowly, staring at the paper in her hands, feeling the full weight of the coincidence settle over her. She had helped this man rebuild his failing company anonymously, years before he had ever met her sister, without either of them realizing the strange, invisible thread already connecting their lives. She considered, for a long moment, whether to say anything at all before the wedding. Ultimately, she decided against forcing the revelation prematurely, choosing instead to let the truth unfold naturally, trusting that timing mattered as much as honesty itself. She placed the folder back into her filing cabinet, feeling a quiet, steady calm settle over her, different from the anxious uncertainty she had carried for weeks. Whatever Melissa believed about the dynamic between them, whatever quiet humiliations she continued to orchestrate, Claire now carried a private knowledge that shifted the entire foundation beneath her sister's carefully constructed narrative. She did not yet know exactly how or when this truth would surface, but she trusted, with a calm certainty rooted in years of quiet resilience, that it eventually would. That night, as Claire prepared for bed, she allowed herself a small, private smile, not out of vindictiveness, but out of a deep, settling relief. For years, she had quietly given, without expecting recognition, helped without needing credit. and built a life defined by steady integrity rather than public applause. Now, unexpectedly, that quiet integrity was about to intersect directly with the very wedding designed to diminish her, and Claire felt, for the first time in a long while, a sense of calm anticipation rather than dread as the day drew steadily closer. The following morning, Claire debated whether to share her discovery with Priya, ultimately deciding that speaking it aloud might help her process the strange weight of the coincidence. During their lunch break, she recounted the entire story quietly, watching Priya's expression shift from surprise to something close to disbelief. "You're telling me you saved your future brother-in-law's company years ago, and neither of them has any idea?" Priya asked, setting down her fork. "It looks that way," Claire said. "I never met him directly. Everything went through the support organization. I didn't even know his full name at the time, just the company details." "Claire, this is unbelievable. Are you going to say something?" "I'm not sure yet," Claire admitted. "Part of me wants to let it come out naturally, if it's meant to. Another part of me worries that saying anything before the wedding might look like I'm trying to steal attention away from Melissa." Priya studied her carefully. "Or it might finally give people a reason to see you clearly, instead of through whatever distorted picture your sister keeps painting." Claire considered this, stirring her tea slowly. "Maybe. But I've spent years staying quiet about the things I've done for this family, the sacrifices, the support I gave without asking for anything in return. I'm not going to start demanding recognition now, just because the timing happens to be dramatic." Priya reached across the table, squeezing Claire's hand gently. "That's exactly why you deserve it, though. Because you never demanded it in the first place." Claire smiled faintly, grateful for her friend's unwavering support, even as uncertainty continued to churn quietly beneath her calm exterior. Later that afternoon, Claire ran into Nathan near the hospital administration office, and he immediately noticed the distracted look on her face. "Everything all right?" he asked, falling into step beside her as she walked toward the elevator. "It's complicated," Claire admitted. "I found out something strange about my sister's fiancé. Turns out, I may have helped his company recover from near collapse years ago, before either of them knew me." Nathan's eyebrows rose with genuine interest. "That's quite a coincidence. Are you going to tell them?" "I haven't decided," Claire said. "Part of me feels like it isn't my place to interrupt her wedding narrative with something that might make it seem like I'm trying to overshadow her." "For what it's worth," Nathan said thoughtfully, "the truth has a way of surfacing on its own, especially in situations built on so much unspoken tension. Sometimes, it's not about forcing recognition. It's simply about being ready when the truth chooses its own moment." Claire looked at him, appreciating the calm clarity in his perspective. "That's a good way to put it." "I've noticed you tend to carry a lot quietly," Nathan added gently. "I hope, whatever happens, you allow yourself to be seen properly, eventually." Claire felt an unexpected warmth at his words, a small flicker of comfort amid the emotional complexity surrounding her sister's wedding. She thanked him softly, before continuing toward her afternoon rounds, carrying his words with her throughout the rest of her shift. That weekend, Claire attended another wedding-related gathering, this time, a smaller bridal shower hosted by Melissa's closest friends. The atmosphere buzzed with excitement, gift wrapping paper scattered across tables, laughter rising every few minutes as Melissa opened elaborate presents meant to prepare her for married life. Claire sat quietly near the edge of the group, offering polite smiles whenever necessary, while internally processing the private knowledge she now carried about David's past. At one point, one of Melissa's friends mentioned David's business struggles years earlier, casually recounting how he had once nearly lost everything before some mysterious consultant helped turn things around. "He still talks about that person sometimes," the friend said. "Says it completely changed the direction of his life. He never even got a proper name, just some contact through a small business support program." Melissa laughed lightly, waving a hand dismissively. "Well, whoever it was, they clearly did something right. Look at him now." Claire remained silent throughout the exchange, feeling the strange weight of unspoken truth settle heavily in the room, invisible to everyone except herself. She wondered, briefly, how differently the conversation might unfold if she chose to reveal what she knew in that very moment, then decided once again that the timing did not yet feel right. She trusted, quietly and steadily, that the truth would surface exactly when it needed to, without her forcing its arrival prematurely. As the shower wound down and guests began gathering their things, Melissa approached Claire near the door, her expression carrying a rare flicker of something almost sincere. "Thank you for coming, Claire. I know things haven't always been easy between us." Claire studied her sister for a long moment, searching for any deeper meaning beneath the simple statement. "I'm happy to be here for you, Melissa. Truly." Melissa nodded, offering a small, uncertain smile before turning back toward her friends, leaving Claire standing quietly near the doorway, holding on to a private knowledge that would soon, inevitably, reshape everything her sister believed about the family she had spent years quietly underestimating. Driving home that night, Claire passed the old business support building where she had once submitted her consulting paperwork years earlier, a modest brick office tucked between a bakery and a hardware store. She slowed the car briefly, studying the familiar facade, remembering long evenings spent poring over spreadsheets and delivery schedules for a struggling company she had never expected to matter beyond the completion of her assignment. Back then, she had simply wanted to help, to use her skills for something beyond the walls of the hospital, never imagining that the anonymous business she had quietly rescued would one day belong to the very man about to become her brother-in-law. She pulled into her driveway a few minutes later, sitting quietly in the car before heading inside, allowing herself to sit with the strange, layered irony of the situation. For years, her family had measured her worth by the absence of a wedding ring, never once considering the quiet, meaningful ways she had shaped lives outside their narrow view of success. Now, without any deliberate effort on her part, one of those quiet acts of generosity was about to walk directly into the center of her sister's carefully curated celebration, carrying consequences none of them could yet foresee. Inside her house, Claire brewed a cup of chamomile tea and sat by the window, watching the quiet street outside settle into evening stillness. She thought about her father's old words again, about strength that did not need to be loud to matter, and felt a renewed sense of peace settle over her. Whatever unfolded at the wedding, whatever reactions followed once the truth eventually surfaced, Claire reminded herself that her worth had never depended on anyone else's recognition. She had simply done what felt right, quietly and consistently, and now, for reasons she could not fully control, that quiet integrity was about to meet the spotlight in ways she never could have predicted. David Langford sat across from Melissa at a quiet corner table in a downtown restaurant, reviewing final wedding logistics on his tablet, while she scrolled through seating arrangements on her phone. Neither of them noticed the small folder Claire had left behind weeks earlier at a shared family gathering, mistakenly picked up by Diane, and later handed back to Claire, without either sister realizing its contents held a connection neither had yet discovered. "I finalized the groomsmen's suits today," David said, glancing up from his tablet. "Everything's on schedule." "Good," Melissa replied, still focused on her phone. "I need to finalize the toast order too. I still haven't decided exactly what I want Claire to say." David looked up, curiosity flickering across his face. "Your sister, right? The nurse?" "Yes," Melissa said, waving a hand dismissively. "She's a good person, just a little behind in life. I thought it might be nice for her to say something about patience, waiting for the right person. Something inspiring for the single guests." David studied her for a moment, something faintly uncomfortable crossing his expression. "That seems like an odd thing to ask someone to speak about at your wedding." Melissa shrugged. "She'll be fine with it. She always goes along with things." David said nothing further, though a small furrow remained between his brows as he returned his attention to his tablet, filing away Melissa's comment, without fully understanding why it left him faintly unsettled. Meanwhile, across town, Claire had just finished a demanding shift at the hospital, her mind still occupied by the quiet, unresolved truth she now carried about David's company. She had decided, after much deliberation, that she would not force a revelation before the wedding, choosing instead to let events unfold naturally, rather than risk overshadowing her sister's celebration through direct confrontation. That evening, she received an unexpected call from her old business support contact, a woman named Susan Okafor, who had coordinated Claire's consulting placement years earlier. Susan explained that the organization was compiling an anniversary report, highlighting former clients who had gone on to significant success, and David Langford's company had been selected as a featured case study. We'd love a quote from the consultant who worked with him originally, Susan explained. I know it's been a while, Claire, but would you be willing to provide a brief statement? We can keep it anonymous if you prefer, just like before. Claire hesitated, surprised by the timing of the request. I appreciate you reaching out, Susan. Can I think about it for a day or two? Of course, Susan said kindly. Take your time. After the call ended, Claire sat quietly, turning the request over in her mind. The timing felt almost too coincidental, arriving just weeks before the wedding, as though the universe itself had decided to nudge her private knowledge closer toward public revelation. She considered declining the request entirely, preferring to keep her role in David's success anonymous, exactly as she had years earlier. Yet something about the situation, the strange convergence of timing, made her pause before deciding anything definitively. The following day, Claire visited her mother's house again, mostly to discuss final details regarding the rehearsal dinner. She found Linda in the kitchen, arranging small favor boxes meant for wedding guests, each one tied carefully with delicate ribbon. Claire, perfect timing, Linda said, glancing up. I need your opinion on something. Claire set her bag down, joining her mother at the counter. What is it? Melissa wants everyone to write a small note of advice for the couple, to be read aloud during the reception. I thought it might be a nice touch, don't you think? Claire nodded slowly. That sounds sweet. I already know what Melissa's written for you to include, Linda continued, her tone carrying a familiar undertone, something encouraging about not giving up on love, even later in life. Claire paused, feeling the now familiar tightening return to her chest. Mom, don't you think it's strange that every part of this wedding somehow circles back to reminding everyone that I'm single? Linda sighed, setting down the ribbon she had been holding. Claire, please don't turn this into something bigger than it is. Melissa just wants to include you in a meaningful way. By reminding 200 guests that I haven't found a husband yet, Claire asked quietly, her voice steady despite the frustration simmering beneath it. Linda's expression flickered with visible discomfort, though she quickly smoothed it away, retreating into her usual defensive tone. You're overreacting. This is supposed to be a happy time for our family. Claire studied her mother for a long moment, feeling the weight of years of similar conversations settle heavily over her. She realized, with quiet clarity, that her mother would likely never fully acknowledge the pattern of favoritism that had shaped their family dynamic for so long, choosing instead to protect the fragile piece of Melissa's spotlight, rather than confront an uncomfortable truth. I'll be there, Mom, Claire said finally, her voice calm. I'll support Melissa, the way I always have, but I won't pretend the way this has been handled feels fair. Linda said nothing further, returning her attention to the ribbon in her hands, and Claire left the house shortly after, feeling the familiar ache of being unseen settle once again into her chest. That evening, Claire called Susan back, having reached a decision regarding the anniversary report request. She agreed to provide a brief statement, though she asked that her name remain withheld from the public report, preferring to let her involvement stay quiet, unless circumstances required otherwise. Susan thanked her warmly, mentioning that David himself had expressed genuine gratitude toward the anonymous consultant during his own recorded interview for the report, describing the assistance as one of the most pivotal moments in his professional life. Claire felt a small, private satisfaction at hearing this, a quiet confirmation that her past efforts had mattered deeply to someone, even if that recognition remained hidden from the people who continued to dismiss her present life as somehow incomplete. The following week, tensions escalated further during a dress-fitting appointment attended by the full bridal party. Melissa arrived visibly stressed, snapping at the seamstress over minor alterations, then turning her frustration toward Claire when she arrived a few minutes late due to a hospital emergency. You couldn't have left work a little earlier, Melissa asked sharply, as Claire entered the fitting room. This is important. I'm sorry, Claire said calmly. A patient needed immediate attention. I got here as soon as I could. Melissa exhaled sharply, waving a hand dismissively. Fine. Just try the dress on quickly. We don't have all day. Claire changed into the mustard yellow dress once again, standing quietly as the seamstress made final adjustments. She noticed, throughout the fitting, the quiet, sympathetic glances exchanged between several bridesmaids, none of whom seemed entirely comfortable with the way Melissa continued to treat her older sister in front of the group. After the fitting ended, one of the bridesmaids, a woman named Rebecca who worked alongside David at his company, approached Claire quietly near the exit. "I hope you don't mind me saying this," Rebecca began carefully, "but David mentions an anonymous consultant sometimes, someone who helped save the company years ago. The way he describes it, it sounds like whoever that person was completely changed the direction of his life. I don't know why, but something about the way you carry yourself reminds me of the way he describes that person." Claire felt a small jolt of surprise at Rebecca's observation, though she kept her expression carefully neutral. "That's an interesting comparison," she said simply. Rebecca studied her for a moment longer, before smiling gently. "Anyway, I just thought I'd mention it. You seem like someone who quietly does a lot of good without needing recognition for it." Claire thanked her softly, watching Rebecca walk away, feeling the strange, persistent thread connecting her past and present tighten just a little further. She sensed, with growing certainty, that the truth surrounding David's history was no longer a secret she alone carried, but one slowly gathering momentum among people close enough to eventually notice the pattern themselves. That night, driving home from the fitting, Claire allowed herself a moment of quiet reflection, considering how strange it felt to stand at the center of a slowly unfolding truth, while everyone around her remained focused on surface-level wedding preparations. She thought about Melissa's sharp words earlier that day, about her mother's persistent dismissiveness, about the mustard-yellow dress hanging now in her closet as a quiet symbol of years of subtle exclusion. Yet beneath the exhaustion of these ongoing slights, Claire felt something steady and unshaken, settling deeper within her, a growing awareness that the story her family believed they understood was quietly, irreversibly beginning to shift, carried forward not by her own forceful intervention, but by the simple, patient unfolding of truth that had been set into motion long before anyone in her family had realized its significance. The next morning, Claire woke early, unable to fall back asleep after replaying Rebecca's comment in her mind. She made herself a strong cup of coffee and sat at her kitchen table, staring at her phone, debating whether to reach out to Susan again for more details about the anniversary report. Eventually, curiosity won out, and she sent a short message asking whether David had provided any additional details during his interview that might reveal how much he suspected about the consultant's identity. Susan responded within the hour, explaining that David had mentioned, almost wistfully, that he wished he could properly thank the person who had helped him, since he had never been given a name, only a case file number, and a series of emails from an account tied directly to the support organization, rather than an individual. He had apparently kept a printed copy of one of those early emails in his desk drawer for years, a small reminder of the turning point in his career. Claire read the message twice, feeling an unexpected lump form in her throat. She remembered writing those emails years earlier, carefully outlining strategies for reducing delivery costs and restructuring warehouse staffing, never imagining that the recipient would hold on to her words with such quiet gratitude for years afterward. She set her phone down, staring out her kitchen window, feeling the weight of the coming revelation settle more heavily upon her, no longer an abstract possibility, but an increasingly tangible inevitability. Later that day, Claire attended a quiet lunch with Diane, updating her cousin on the growing pile of small coincidences continuing to surface. Diane listened with wide-eyed astonishment, shaking her head slowly, as Claire finished recounting Rebecca's comment and Susan's latest update. "Claire, this is bigger than just a strange coincidence at this point," Diane said firmly. "This feels like something meant to come out." "I know," Claire admitted. "I just don't want it to come out in a way that turns the wedding into chaos. I don't want people to think I orchestrated this to embarrass Melissa." "Nobody who knows you would ever think that," Diane reassured her. "You've spent your whole life avoiding the spotlight, even when you deserved it. If anything, people will be shocked at how humble you've been about it." Claire managed a small, tired smile. "I just want the day to go smoothly for Melissa, despite everything. I don't want this to feel like I'm stealing her moment." Diane reached across the table, squeezing her cousin's hand firmly. "Claire, you're not stealing anything. If the truth surfaces, it's because it was always there, waiting patiently beneath the surface. That's not sabotage. That's simply reality finally catching up to everyone else." Claire nodded slowly, letting her cousin's words settle over her, feeling a small measure of peace return amid the growing complexity of the situation. She reminded herself once again of her father's steady wisdom, of her grandmother's fierce encouragement, and of her own quiet resilience, built carefully over years of overlooked sacrifice. Whatever unfolded in the coming weeks, she intended to meet it not with anxiety, but with the same calm, steady grace that had carried her through every difficult chapter of her life so far. That same afternoon, David sat in his office reviewing the anniversary report draft Susan's organization had sent for his approval. He read through the summary of his company's turnaround, pausing on a paragraph describing the anonymous consultant's contribution, the careful restructuring of delivery routes, the staffing changes that had ultimately saved the business from closing its doors permanently. He picked up his phone and called Susan directly, a habit he had maintained over the years whenever the topic of his early struggles arose. "I know you probably can't tell me," David said once Susan answered, "but is there any chance the consultant might be willing to meet, even briefly? I've always wanted the chance to properly thank whoever helped me back then." Susan hesitated for a moment before responding carefully. "I can pass along the request, David. I can't promise anything, but I'll ask." After ending the call, David sat quietly at his desk, staring at the old printed email he still kept in his top drawer, its edges slightly worn from years of occasional handling. He had built an entire company, an entire future, partly upon the foundation of a stranger's guidance, and the thought that he might finally learn their identity, right as he prepared to marry, felt strangely significant, though he could not fully articulate why. Later that evening, Melissa arrived at David's apartment, visibly tired from the day's wedding preparations. She dropped onto the couch beside him, kicking off her shoes with an exhausted sigh. The dress fitting was a nightmare today. Claire was late again. David glanced up from his laptop. "Maybe she has a good reason. Doesn't she work long hospital shifts?" "She always has a reason," Melissa said, rolling her eyes lightly. "I just wish, for once, she'd prioritize something other than her job." David studied her for a moment, something thoughtful crossing his expression. "You talk about her a lot, actually. More than I would have expected." Melissa shrugged, reaching for the remote control. "She's my sister. I just want her to be happy, that's all. I worry about her being alone." David considered pointing out the underlying assumption in her statement, the quiet suggestion that being unmarried automatically meant being unhappy, but he decided against it, sensing that the topic carried more emotional weight than Melissa was willing to openly examine. Instead, he simply nodded, allowing the conversation to shift toward lighter wedding details, though a small, persistent curiosity about Claire lingered quietly in the back of his mind, unconnected yet to the anonymous consultant he hoped to one day properly thank. Unbeknownst to either sister, the quiet threads of coincidence continued weaving steadily closer together, drawing nearer, with each passing day, toward a convergence neither Melissa nor David could yet anticipate, one that would soon reshape the entire dynamic of the family gathering meant, originally, to celebrate nothing more complicated than a wedding between two people building a life together. Claire, meanwhile, spent the following days moving through her regular hospital routine, with a quiet, watchful patience she had rarely felt before. She caught herself, more than once, staring at David's name on old paperwork tucked in her filing cabinet, wondering how their two separate worlds, hers built on quiet nursing shifts and anonymous consulting work, his built on visible business success, had managed to intersect so completely, without either of them realizing it until now. She did not rush toward any conclusion, choosing instead to trust the slow, steady unfolding of events, confident that whatever needed to be revealed would find its own moment, exactly as it always seemed to in the end. The wedding was now only 3 weeks away, and the pace of preparation had shifted into something closer to controlled chaos. Melissa spent her evenings juggling calls with caterers, florists, and photographers, her patience thinning with each passing day, while Claire continued balancing her hospital shifts alongside the growing demands of the wedding party. On a Thursday evening, Claire arrived at Melissa's apartment for a final walkthrough of the reception schedule, only to find her sister in the middle of a heated phone call with the wedding planner. She waited quietly in the living room until Melissa finally hung up, exhaling sharply as she tossed her phone onto the couch cushion. "Everything all right?" Claire asked carefully. "The florist doubled the price for the centerpieces," Melissa said, rubbing her temples, "and the string quartet canceled last minute. This entire day is falling apart." "I'm sure it will come together," Claire offered gently. "These things usually do." Melissa shot her a sharp glance. Easy for you to say. You don't have 200 people watching every detail of your life fall into place or fall apart. Claire kept her expression steady, refusing to rise to the bait. I just meant that stress is normal before a big event. You've planned everything so carefully. It's going to be beautiful. Melissa softened slightly, though the tension in her shoulders remained visible. I just want everything perfect. David's family is incredibly successful. I don't want anyone thinking I couldn't handle organizing something this important. Claire studied her sister for a long moment, noticing something she rarely allowed herself to see clearly: the deep insecurity hiding beneath Melissa's polished exterior. For all her sharp comments and subtle cruelties, Melissa seemed to be carrying her own quiet anxieties about proving herself worthy of the life she was stepping into. You don't have to prove anything to anyone, Claire said quietly. David is marrying you because of who you are, not because of centerpieces or string quartets. Melissa looked at her sister with an expression Claire could not quite decipher, something between surprise and discomfort, as though she had not expected kindness in that particular moment. Thanks, I guess, she said finally, her voice quieter than usual. They continued reviewing the schedule together for the next hour, the conversation remaining civil, even occasionally warm, reminding Claire briefly of the closeness they had shared as children, before family dynamics had slowly pulled them apart. She left the apartment that evening, feeling a small, cautious hope that perhaps beneath all the years of quiet competition, some remnant of genuine sisterly connection still remained. That hope, however, proved short-lived. 2 days later, Claire received a message from Diane, containing a screenshot of a group chat among several bridesmaids, accidentally shared with Claire after Melissa forgot to remove her from an old, since-deleted group thread. The messages revealed Melissa complaining openly about Claire's presence in the wedding, describing her as the token single sister everyone feels sorry for, and joking about how the toast about patience would be a good reminder for her, honestly. Claire read the messages slowly, feeling something cold settle in her chest, the earlier warmth from their conversation 2 days prior evaporating entirely. She set her phone down and sat quietly for several minutes, processing the sting of betrayal layered beneath years of already familiar cruelty. She called Diane immediately. I saw the messages. I'm so sorry, Claire, Diane said quickly. I didn't mean for you to see them like that. I just wanted you to know what's actually been said behind your back. No, I'm glad you sent it, Claire replied, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. I needed to see it clearly, without softening it in my head. What are you going to do? Claire thought carefully before answering. Nothing, for now. I'm still going to the wedding. I'm still going to be graceful. But I'm done pretending I don't see exactly what's happening. That evening, Claire called Priya, needing the steady comfort of her closest friend's perspective. She recounted the messages in detail, her voice occasionally wavering despite her attempts at composure. Claire, that's incredibly hurtful, Priya said firmly. You've supported that woman your entire life, and this is how she talks about you behind closed doors? Apparently, Claire said quietly. I keep thinking I've finally accepted the way things are between us, and then something like this reminds me exactly how deep it goes. You don't have to accept it, Priya said. You could skip the wedding entirely. Nobody would blame you. Claire considered this for a long moment, staring at the ceiling of her living room. Part of me wants to, but another part of me refuses to let her cruelty dictate my choices. If I stay home, it just confirms exactly what she already believes, that I'm too fragile to handle being around her happiness. You're one of the strongest people I know, Priya said firmly. Whatever you decide, I'll support you completely. Claire thanked her friend quietly, before ending the call, sitting alone in the stillness of her living room, feeling the weight of the past several weeks settle heavily over her. She thought about the mustard yellow dress hanging in her closet, about the seating chart placing her near the kitchen, about the cruel jokes shared casually among bridesmaids who barely knew her, and about her mother's persistent refusal to acknowledge any of it as unfair. Yet beneath all of that accumulated hurt, Claire also thought about David, about the quiet, anonymous consulting work she had done years earlier, about Susan's recent message revealing his genuine gratitude toward a stranger who had once helped him rebuild his entire future. She thought about Rebecca's comment during the dress fitting, about the printed email David still kept in his desk drawer, and felt, despite everything, a quiet, steady certainty settle over her, that the wedding ahead was not simply a stage for her sister's cruelty, but potentially the very moment truth would finally surface, exactly as it needed to. The following weekend, Claire attended a small gathering hosted by her grandmother, a quiet, intimate lunch, far removed from the chaos surrounding Melissa's wedding preparations. Margaret studied her granddaughter carefully throughout the afternoon, noticing the subtle exhaustion behind Claire's composed exterior. "Something's weighing on you," Margaret said finally, once the other guests had left and the two women sat alone in the quiet living room. Claire hesitated before recounting the bridesmaid group chat, the cruel jokes, the persistent pattern of dismissiveness she continued to endure. Margaret listened carefully, her expression tightening with quiet anger as Claire finished speaking. "I've watched this happen for years," Margaret said finally. "Your mother never corrected it, and Melissa never learned any different. But Claire, listen to me carefully. You are not required to keep absorbing this kind of treatment simply to preserve some fragile family peace." "I know," Claire said quietly, "but I've decided to go to the wedding anyway. Not for her, for myself. I refuse to let her cruelty push me into hiding." Margaret studied her for a long moment, something like fierce pride crossing her weathered features. "Good, because sometimes, Claire, the bravest thing a person can do is walk directly into a room full of people who underestimate them, and simply refuse to shrink." Claire smiled faintly, drawing strength from her grandmother's steady conviction. "I plan to do exactly that." As the visit ended, and Claire drove home that evening, she felt a renewed sense of quiet determination settle over her, steadier now than the uncertainty she had carried in previous weeks. Whatever cruelty awaited her at the wedding, whatever fresh humiliation Melissa believed she was orchestrating, Claire intended to walk into that day, carrying the full weight of her own quiet strength, trusting that truth, patience, and dignity would ultimately outlast every carefully planned slight her sister continued to prepare against her. The following Monday, Claire returned to work, grateful for the steady rhythm of hospital routines that gave her mind something reliable to focus on, besides the emotional undertow of the wedding preparations. During her morning rounds, she checked on a patient named Harold, an older man recovering from a hip replacement who had grown fond of Claire's calm bedside manner over his week-long stay. "You seem a little tired today, young lady," Harold observed as Claire checked his vitals. "Long few weeks," Claire admitted with a small smile. "Family wedding coming up." "Ah, weddings," Harold said knowingly. "My late wife used to say weddings reveal more about a family than any other event. All that pressure has a way of showing people's true colors." Claire paused, considering his words. "That's certainly proving true in my case." Harold studied her kindly. "Whatever's happening, I can tell you're the type who handles things with grace. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise." Claire thanked him, moved by the unexpected wisdom offered by a patient she barely knew, yet who seemed to see her clearly in a way many of her own family members failed to manage. She finished her rounds with a slightly lighter step, carrying his words with her throughout the remainder of her shift. During her lunch break, Nathan found her sitting alone in the courtyard, noticeably subdued compared to her usual composed demeanor. He sat down across from her without saying anything at first, simply offering quiet companionship. "Rough week?" he finally asked. Claire exhaled slowly. "I found out some things my sister has been saying about me behind my back. Nothing I didn't already suspect, honestly, but seeing it written out so plainly still stung more than I expected." Nathan's expression turned thoughtful. "Family has a strange way of hurting us more deeply than strangers ever could, precisely because we expect better from them." "Exactly," Claire said quietly. "I keep telling myself I've made peace with how things are between us. And then something like this happens, and I realize I haven't fully made peace with it at all." Nathan considered his words carefully before speaking. Making peace doesn't mean pretending the hurt doesn't exist. Sometimes it just means choosing not to let that hurt control your actions, even while it still lingers underneath. Claire looked at him, appreciating the quiet depth of his perspective. "That's a kinder way of thinking about it than I usually allow myself." "You deserve some kindness, Claire," Nathan said simply, his tone gentle but sincere. "Especially from yourself." They sat together in comfortable silence for a while longer before returning to their separate duties, and Claire found herself carrying a small, unexpected warmth throughout the rest of her afternoon, grateful for the steady presence Nathan continued to offer during an otherwise difficult stretch of weeks. That evening, Claire decided to confront the emotional weight of the bridesmaid messages directly, rather than allowing them to fester silently within her. She sat down and wrote a long, private journal entry, something she had not done consistently since her father's passing years earlier. She wrote about the seating chart, the mustard yellow dress, the cruel jokes shared among women who barely knew her, and the persistent ache of being reduced, again and again, to nothing more than her relationship status. As she wrote, she found herself circling back repeatedly to memories of her father, to the quiet, steady encouragement he had always offered her throughout her life. She remembered a specific conversation from her early 20s when she had expressed doubt about turning down a prestigious overseas nursing fellowship in order to stay behind and help care for him during his declining health. Claire, he had told her then, holding her hand tightly despite his own weakening grip. Some choices look like sacrifice to everyone else, but to the person making them, they simply feel like love. Don't ever let anyone convince you that staying to help the people you love makes you smaller. It makes you exactly the kind of person this world desperately needs more of. She had carried those words with her for years, quietly proud of the choice she had made, even as her mother and sister continued treating her decision to remain close to home as somehow less impressive than Melissa's more visibly ambitious path. Writing about it now, weeks before the wedding, Claire felt a fresh wave of clarity settle over her, a reminder that her worth had never actually depended on the approval she continued to seek, in vain, from the two people least equipped to offer it honestly. She closed her journal that night feeling lighter than she had in weeks. The earlier sting of Melissa's cruel messages softened slightly by the steady reminder of her own quiet, enduring strength. She thought again about the wedding ahead, about the strange, unresolved connection linking her past to David's present success, and allowed herself, for the first time in a long while, a small measure of genuine anticipation rather than dread. The following weekend, Claire attended one final wedding preparation meeting, this time focused on rehearsal logistics. Melissa arrived distracted and short-tempered, snapping at vendors over minor details, while Claire quietly absorbed the tension without allowing it to disturb her renewed sense of calm. At one point, Melissa turned toward her sharply. "Have you decided what you're saying for the toast yet?" she asked. "I need to finalize the program." Claire met her sister's gaze steadily. "I have some ideas," she said simply. "Don't worry, I'll make sure it's memorable." Melissa studied her for a moment, something flickering briefly behind her eyes, perhaps confusion at Claire's composed tone, though she said nothing further, returning her attention instead to the growing list of unresolved logistical details demanding her focus. Claire watched her sister move briskly between vendors, feeling, despite everything, a quiet, steady resolve settle firmly into place. Whatever awaited her at that wedding, she intended to meet it not with bitterness, but with the same calm dignity that had carried her through every difficult chapter of her life thus far, trusting fully that the truth, when it finally arrived, would speak far louder than any cruelty her sister had carefully prepared against her. On her drive home that evening, Claire stopped briefly at a small park near her neighborhood, sitting on a bench overlooking a quiet pond as the sun began to set. She thought about how strange it was that a single wedding could hold so many layers, cruelty and coincidence, family history and quiet redemption, all tangled together beneath the surface of flower arrangements and seating charts. She thought about Harold's words, about weddings revealing true colors, and wondered, with a calm curiosity rather than anxiety, exactly whose true colors would end up most visible once the day finally arrived. She stayed there a while longer, watching the light shift slowly across the water, before finally rising and heading home, carrying with her a steady sense that whatever came next, she was ready to meet it fully as herself. Susan Okafor called Claire on a quiet Tuesday evening, her voice carrying an unusual note of hesitation that immediately caught Claire's attention. "I need to tell you something," Susan began carefully. David asked again about meeting the consultant. This time he was more insistent. He mentioned that with his wedding coming up, he wants to properly close that chapter of gratitude before starting his married life. "I told him I would ask you directly, rather than continuing to deflect." Claire sat quietly for a long moment, absorbing the request. She had spent years keeping her consulting work anonymous, partly out of personal preference, partly because she had simply never expected the two threads of her life to intersect so directly. Now, with the wedding only weeks away, the boundaries between her past and present were beginning to blur in ways she could no longer fully control. "Did he say anything else?" Claire asked. "Only that he owes his entire career to that anonymous guidance," Susan said. "He seemed genuinely emotional talking about it, Claire. I think this matters to him more than you realize." After ending the call, Claire sat in silence, weighing her options carefully. She could continue declining the meeting, preserving her anonymity, exactly as she always had, or she could finally allow the truth to surface, regardless of how complicated the timing might feel, given her fractured relationship with Melissa. She thought about her father's steady wisdom, about her grandmother's fierce encouragement, and about the quiet integrity she had built her entire life around. Slowly, she began to understand that hiding any longer would only prolong an inevitable reckoning that was already, in its own quiet way, gathering momentum. The following day, Claire called Susan back. "Tell him yes," she said simply, "but not yet. Let's wait until after the wedding. I don't want this discovery to overshadow Melissa's day." Susan agreed, promising to relay the message carefully, and Claire hung up feeling a strange mixture of relief and lingering uncertainty. She had made her decision, choosing patience over immediate disclosure, trusting that timing mattered as much as honesty itself. Meanwhile, tensions within the wedding party continued escalating as the big day approached. During a bridal party group dinner, intended to build camaraderie among the wedding attendants, Melissa arrived late, visibly stressed after a heated argument with the venue coordinator over last-minute changes to the floor plan. She sat down heavily beside Claire, sighing loudly before addressing the table. "This entire wedding is turning into a disaster," Melissa announced, her voice sharp with frustration. "Nothing is going according to plan." "It'll come together," Rebecca offered gently from across the table. "These things always feel chaotic right before they happen." Melissa waved a hand dismissively, her eyes landing on Claire. "At least I don't have to worry about competing with anyone else's wedding glamour at this table. That's one small mercy." The comment landed with an uncomfortable silence, several bridesmaids exchanging awkward glances before quickly returning to their meals. Claire felt the familiar heat rise in her chest, though she kept her expression carefully composed, refusing to give her sister the reaction she seemed to be hoping for. "I'm sure everything will look beautiful," Claire said simply, her voice steady despite the sting of the remark. Melissa studied her for a moment, something almost disappointed flickering behind her eyes, as though she had expected a stronger reaction. She turned her attention back to her plate, the conversation shifting awkwardly towards safer topics, though the tension lingered heavily over the remainder of the dinner. After the meal ended, Rebecca caught up with Claire in the parking lot, her expression apologetic. "I'm sorry about that comment earlier. I don't know why she does that." "It's all right," Claire said quietly. "I've had years of practice absorbing it." Rebecca hesitated before continuing. "Can I ask you something? David mentioned again today how much he wishes he could thank the person who helped rebuild his company all those years ago. He's been thinking about it a lot lately, especially with the wedding coming up. It's strange, but every time he talks about it, something about the way he describes that person's guidance reminds me so strongly of you." Claire felt her pulse quicken slightly, though she kept her expression neutral. "That's a curious observation." Rebecca studied her carefully, clearly sensing something beneath Claire's calm exterior, though she chose not to press further. "Well, whoever it was, David says they changed the entire direction of his life. I just thought you should know how much it still means to him, all these years later." Claire thanked her quietly, watching Rebecca walk toward her car, feeling the weight of the approaching revelation settle more heavily over her with each passing conversation. She sensed, with growing certainty, that the truth was no longer simply waiting patiently in the background, but actively pressing forward, seeking its own moment to finally surface. That night, Claire called her grandmother, needing the steady comfort of Margaret's unwavering perspective. She recounted the dinner, Melissa's cutting remark, and Rebecca's persistent observations about David's gratitude toward his anonymous mentor. "It sounds to me," Margaret said thoughtfully, "like the universe has decided your sister's wedding is going to teach her a lesson she desperately needs to learn." "I'm not trying to teach anyone a lesson, Grandma," Claire said. "I just want to get through this day with my dignity intact." "Sometimes," Margaret replied gently, Dignity and lessons arrive together, whether we intend them to or not. You've spent your whole life quietly giving, without asking for recognition. Perhaps it's simply time the universe decided to give a little of that recognition back to you, whether your sister is ready for it or not. Claire considered her grandmother's words carefully, feeling a small measure of peace settle over her, despite the mounting tension surrounding the wedding preparations. I just hope it doesn't turn into more chaos than necessary. Whatever happens, Margaret said firmly, you'll handle it with the same grace you always have. That much I have never doubted. After ending the call, Claire sat quietly in her living room, reflecting on the strange convergence of events unfolding around her. She thought about the mustard yellow dress hanging in her closet, about the seating chart placing her near the kitchen, about the bridesmaid messages mocking her single status, and about David's quiet, persistent gratitude toward a mentor he had never properly met. Each thread, individually painful or complicated, seemed now to be weaving together toward something larger than any single moment of cruelty or coincidence. The following weekend marked the final major milestone before the wedding itself, the rehearsal dinner planning meeting, where family members from both sides would gather to finalize toasts, seating, and last-minute details. Claire arrived early, hoping for a few quiet moments before the chaos of the larger gathering began, and found herself unexpectedly alone with David, for the first time since the engagement had been announced months earlier. Claire, right? David said, extending a hand warmly as she entered the meeting room. I don't think we've properly met yet, despite everything. That's true, Claire said, shaking his hand, feeling an unexpected flutter of nervousness at finally standing face to face with the man whose company she had once quietly helped save. It's nice to finally meet you properly. Melissa talks about you sometimes, David said, his tone carefully neutral. I understand you're a nurse. Senior nurse. Yes, Claire confirmed, at Ashford General. Something flickered briefly across David's expression, a faint recognition Claire could not quite interpret. Ashford General, he repeated slowly. That name sounds familiar for some reason. Claire's heart quickened slightly, though she kept her expression composed. It's a well-known hospital in the area. David studied her for a moment longer, something thoughtful lingering behind his eyes, though he did not press further, the conversation shifting naturally as other family members began arriving for the meeting. Claire took her seat quietly, feeling the weight of the almost revelation settle heavily over her, sensing that the careful anonymity she had maintained for years was rapidly approaching its final, inevitable unraveling. The meeting began shortly after, with the wedding planner running through the rehearsal dinner schedule, while Melissa interjected frequently with small adjustments. Claire sat near the back of the room, half listening, half studying David from a careful distance, noticing the way he occasionally glanced at her with a puzzled expression, as though trying to place a memory just out of reach. During a brief pause in the meeting, David leaned toward Melissa. Has your sister always worked at Ashford General? For years, Melissa replied, only half paying attention as she reviewed a floral arrangement catalog. Why do you ask? No reason, David said, though his gaze drifted once more toward Claire, who was now discussing table linens with the wedding planner, her expression calm and professional, despite the quiet storm building within her. After the meeting concluded, most attendees filtered out toward the parking lot, exchanging final pleasantries before the rehearsal dinner itself, still a week away. Claire lingered behind, gathering her notes, when David approached her again, his expression thoughtful. This might sound like an odd question, he said carefully, but did you ever do consulting work, outside of nursing? A few years back, maybe? Claire felt her breath catch slightly, though she kept her voice steady. I did, actually, briefly. Logistics and staffing efficiency, mostly for small businesses struggling with tight budgets. David's eyes widened slightly. Through a support organization? Anonymous placements? Claire hesitated, feeling the moment stretch between them, heavy with unspoken possibility. Yes, she said finally, quietly. That's exactly right. David stared at her for a long moment, something shifting visibly behind his expression, disbelief slowly giving way to dawning recognition. Claire, he said slowly, I think you might be the person who saved my company. Claire held his gaze steadily, feeling the years of careful anonymity finally, quietly collapsing into the open. I believe I might be, she admitted softly. David let out a short, stunned laugh, running a hand through his hair. I've spent years wondering who helped me. I kept an old email in my desk for years, hoping someday I'd have the chance to properly thank whoever it was. And it's been you, this entire time, my future sister-in-law. Claire offered a small, careful smile. I didn't realize it either, not until a few weeks ago, when your name came up in conversation, and something about it felt familiar. I wasn't sure how or when to bring it up. David shook his head slowly, still visibly processing the revelation. This is incredible. Melissa has no idea, does she? No, Claire admitted. I didn't want it to overshadow the wedding preparations. I was planning to tell you both properly, after everything settled down. David studied her for a long moment, something warm and genuine settling into his expression. Claire, what you did for me changed everything. My company, my entire career, all of it, exists because of the guidance you gave. Guidance you offered, without ever expecting recognition. I don't think I can properly put into words how much that means to me, especially now, learning it was you all along. Claire felt an unexpected warmth rise in her chest, a small, quiet validation after weeks of enduring her family's persistent dismissiveness. I'm glad it helped, she said simply. That's really all I ever wanted, for it to make a genuine difference. David nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. I understand if you want to wait until after the wedding to share this more broadly. But Claire, I want you to know, regardless of timing, how much this means to me. And I intend to make sure everyone understands exactly how much you've done, not just for my company, but for the person I've become because of it. Claire felt a small flicker of nervousness at his words, uncertain exactly what he intended, though she trusted, somehow, that whatever unfolded from this moment forward would arrive exactly when it needed to. Thank you, David, she said quietly. That means a great deal to me. They parted ways shortly after, David heading toward his car, with a visibly lighter step, clearly still processing the unexpected revelation, while Claire remained standing quietly in the parking lot, feeling the weight of years of quiet, anonymous effort finally beginning to surface into the light. She drove home that evening with a strange, unfamiliar lightness settling over her, a feeling she had not experienced in longer than she could easily remember, the quiet satisfaction of being truly seen, even if only by one person within her family's orbit so far. That night, she sat by her window for a long while, replaying the conversation over and over, marveling at the strange, patient unfolding of truth she had trusted so carefully throughout the preceding weeks. She thought about her father's steady wisdom, about her grandmother's fierce encouragement, and about the quiet integrity that had guided every choice she had made throughout her life. Whatever happened next, whatever Melissa's reaction might eventually become, once she learned the full truth, Claire felt, for the first time in a long while, a settled confidence that the story unfolding around her family's wedding was no longer entirely within her sister's control. The next morning, Claire woke early and called Priya before her shift began, needing to share the news with someone who would understand its full weight. Priya listened in stunned silence before letting out a delighted laugh. Claire, this is unbelievable. He actually recognized you, in person. What did Melissa say? She doesn't know yet, Claire admitted. David said he wants to wait until after the wedding, though I'm not entirely sure he'll manage to keep it quiet. He seemed genuinely moved. I don't blame him, Priya said. You changed his entire life, Claire, and you never once asked for anything in return. If he wants to shout it from the rooftops, honestly, I think he's earned the right to. Claire laughed softly, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. I just hope it doesn't turn into more drama than the day can handle. Maybe, Priya said gently. It's exactly the kind of drama your family needs. Sometimes the truth has to shake things up a little before people finally start seeing clearly. Claire considered her friend's words carefully as she drove to work that morning, feeling a quiet, steady sense of anticipation replace the anxious uncertainty that had followed her for weeks. Whatever unfolded next, she trusted, at last, that she was ready to meet it fully as herself. The rehearsal dinner arrived on a warm Friday evening, held in a private room at an elegant restaurant overlooking the river. Soft lighting illuminated long tables decorated with simple white flowers, and the low hum of conversation filled the space as family members and close friends gathered to celebrate the final night before the wedding itself. Claire arrived wearing a deep navy dress, understated but elegant, her hair pulled back neatly. She had decided, after weeks of careful consideration, that tonight she would simply be herself, calm and composed, regardless of whatever new discomfort her sister might attempt to orchestrate. She had not spoken with David again since their conversation in the parking lot days earlier, though she noticed him glancing toward her occasionally throughout the early part of the evening, his expression carrying a quiet warmth she had not previously associated with him. Melissa moved through the room with practiced grace, greeting guests, laughing brightly at every compliment offered about the upcoming wedding. She seemed, for the moment, entirely at ease, unaware of the quiet revelation that had already passed between her sister and her fiancé days earlier. Dinner began smoothly. Plates of carefully arranged food served alongside polite conversation, among tables filled with relatives from both families. Claire sat near the middle of the room this time, a small improvement from earlier seating arrangements, though she noticed Melissa still seemed to hover close to the head table, ensuring every important guest remained within easy reach of her attention. As the meal concluded, the toasts began. David's father spoke first, offering warm, traditional remarks about watching his son grow into a successful, thoughtful man ready for marriage. Melissa's father figure, an uncle who had stepped into that role after Claire and Melissa's own father passed, offered a brief, heartfelt toast about family and new beginnings. Then, Melissa herself stood, tapping her glass gently to gather the room's attention. "I just want to say," Melissa began, her voice bright and confident, "how grateful I am for everyone here tonight, especially my family, who have supported me through everything leading up to this moment." She paused, glancing briefly toward Claire, with a small, knowing smile. "Including my sister Claire, who I hope will find her own happiness someday soon, the way I have." A ripple of soft, uncomfortable laughter moved through parts of the room, though several guests, including Rebecca and a few of David's colleagues, exchanged visibly awkward glances rather than joining the laughter. Claire kept her expression steady, offering a small, composed smile in response, refusing to let the comment disturb her calm exterior. David, seated beside Melissa, shifted slightly in his seat, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly at his fiancée's remark. He said nothing immediately, though Claire noticed the subtle discomfort crossing his features, a quiet acknowledgement that the joke had landed with more unease than Melissa seemed to realize. As dessert was served, David rose from his seat, tapping his glass gently to signal his own toast. The room quieted, attention shifting toward him with warm anticipation. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight," David began, his voice steady and sincere. "Tomorrow, I marry the woman I love, and I couldn't be more grateful for the family surrounding us as we begin this new chapter together." He paused, glancing briefly toward Claire, who felt her pulse quicken slightly, sensing the shift about to occur. "But tonight, I also want to acknowledge something personal, something that happened just this week, that I still find remarkable," David continued. "Several years ago, before I met Melissa, my company was on the verge of collapse. I was drowning in debt, ready to give up everything I had worked toward. During that time, I received anonymous guidance from a consultant through a local business support program, guidance that completely restructured my operations and ultimately saved my company from closing permanently." The room listened attentively, several guests exchanging curious glances, unsure where this story was heading. "I never learned that consultant's name," David continued. "For years, I kept a printed copy of one of their early emails in my desk, hoping someday I might have the chance to properly thank them. This week, purely by coincidence, I discovered exactly who that consultant was." He paused, his gaze settling directly on Claire, who sat frozen slightly in her seat, feeling every eye in the room beginning to follow his attention. It was Claire. A wave of stunned silence swept through the room, followed almost immediately by a rising murmur of surprised whispers. Melissa's expression shifted rapidly from confusion to visible shock, her mouth opening slightly as she turned to stare at her sister. "Claire," David continued, his voice thick with genuine emotion, "you changed the entire direction of my life, quietly, without ever asking for recognition. You gave me the tools to rebuild everything I thought I had lost, and you did it anonymously, expecting nothing in return. I don't think words can properly capture how grateful I am, not just for what you did for my company, but for the character it reveals about who you are as a person." The room erupted into a mixture of astonished applause and hushed, excited conversation, several guests turning toward Claire with expressions of genuine admiration. Rebecca, seated near the front, pressed a hand to her chest, visibly moved. Even distant relatives who had barely acknowledged Claire throughout the evening now stared at her with newfound curiosity and respect. Melissa sat frozen beside David, her expression caught somewhere between disbelief and visible embarrassment, the earlier confidence in her posture noticeably deflating as the weight of the revelation settled over her. She glanced toward Claire, then back toward David, clearly struggling to process the sudden shift unfolding in front of the entire wedding party. Claire, feeling the full weight of the room's attention, rose slowly from her seat, her heart pounding despite her outward composure. "Thank you, David," she said quietly, her voice carrying just enough to reach the hushed room. "I never expected recognition for that work. I simply wanted to help someone who needed it at the time. I'm glad it made such a meaningful difference." She sat back down amid a fresh round of warm applause, several guests offering quiet, approving nods in her direction. Melissa remained silent throughout the remainder of the toasts, her earlier bright confidence replaced by a visible, uneasy tension she struggled to fully mask. As the dinner began winding down, guests slowly rising to mingle before departing for the evening, Melissa approached Claire quietly, her expression carrying a complicated mixture of embarrassment and confusion. "Why didn't you tell me?" Melissa asked, her voice low, tinged with an emotion Claire could not immediately identify. "I didn't want to make your wedding week about anything other than you," Claire said honestly. "I wasn't planning on saying anything until after everything settled down." Melissa studied her sister for a long moment, something shifting slowly behind her eyes. "You've been sitting on this for weeks." "I have," Claire admitted quietly. "And you still let me treat you the way I have," Melissa said, her voice growing quieter still. The seating chart, the dress, the toast, about waiting for the right person. Claire held her sister's gaze steadily, choosing her words with care. "I let it happen, because I didn't want to make my personal accomplishments about competing with your wedding. That was never my intention." Melissa said nothing for a long moment, her expression visibly conflicted, before turning away abruptly and moving toward the restroom, clearly needing a moment alone to process the sudden shift in perception unfolding around her. Claire watched her go, feeling a strange mixture of vindication and quiet discomfort, unsure exactly how the remainder of the evening, or the wedding itself the following day, might now unfold given this unexpected turn of events. Diane approached moments later, her expression a mixture of astonishment and quiet delight. "Claire, I don't even know what to say. That was incredible." "I didn't plan for it to happen tonight," Claire admitted. "David decided on his own to share it." "Well, whatever the reason," Diane said, squeezing her cousin's hand warmly. "Everyone in that room just watched exactly what kind of person you really are. That's not something Melissa can take back now, no matter how she reacts." Claire nodded slowly, watching the room settle gradually back into its earlier warmth, though the atmosphere now carried an undeniable shift, a quiet acknowledgement among the gathered guests that the story they thought they understood about the two sisters had just changed in ways none of them had anticipated walking into the evening. Linda approached her daughter a few minutes later, her expression uncharacteristically uncertain, lacking the usual confident dismissiveness she carried whenever Claire's accomplishments arose in conversation. "Claire, I had no idea," she said quietly. "Why didn't you ever mention any of this?" "It wasn't something I talked about," Claire said simply. "I did the work because it needed doing, not because I wanted recognition for it." Linda studied her daughter for a long moment, something flickering uncomfortably behind her expression, perhaps the first genuine crack in years of carefully maintained favoritism. "I suppose I've misjudged some things," she said finally, her voice quieter than usual. Claire said nothing immediately, unsure how to respond to an admission she had waited years to hear, however incomplete it remained. "It's all right, Mom," she said eventually, though the words felt strange leaving her mouth, neither fully forgiving nor fully resentful, simply honest. Linda nodded slowly, seemingly at a loss for further words, before drifting back toward the head table, leaving Claire standing quietly amid the gradually thinning crowd. She noticed Aunt Carol watching her from a nearby table, her earlier pitying expression replaced now with something closer to genuine curiosity, though she made no move to approach directly. Nathan, who had been invited as a guest given his growing friendship with Claire, found her near the edge of the room shortly after, his expression warm despite the surrounding chaos. "That took real courage," he said quietly. Standing there, letting that truth surface, exactly as it needed to, without forcing it. "I didn't force any of it," Claire admitted. "David chose to share it. I just happened to be standing there when he did." "Sometimes," Nathan said gently, "the bravest part isn't the big moment itself. It's everything leading up to it, all the quiet patience it takes to simply keep being yourself, while everyone else underestimates you." Claire felt a small, grateful warmth at his words, appreciating the steady comfort of his presence amid the surrounding emotional upheaval. "Thank you, Nathan. I mean that." He offered a small smile before excusing himself to allow her space with her family, and Claire watched him walk away, feeling an unexpected flutter of appreciation for the quiet, steady friendship that had grown between them over recent weeks. Rebecca approached next, her expression still bright with excitement. "Claire, I knew it. The moment David described that consultant, something about it felt familiar. I'm so glad the truth finally came out." "It wasn't really my plan for tonight," Claire admitted, offering a small laugh. "But I suppose some things have a way of surfacing, exactly when they're meant to." "Well, for what it's worth," Rebecca said warmly, "everyone in that room saw exactly who you are tonight. That's not something anyone can take away from you now." As the evening wound toward its natural conclusion, guests slowly departing in small groups, Claire found a quiet moment near the restaurant's outdoor terrace, needing a brief respite from the emotional intensity of the past hour. She stood at the railing, looking out over the darkened river, feeling the cool evening air settle calmly around her. Melissa joined her there a few minutes later, having apparently recovered enough composure to seek out her sister directly. She stood beside Claire at the railing, silent for a long moment before finally speaking. "I've spent years telling myself certain things about you," Melissa said quietly, her voice lacking its usual sharp confidence. "That you were behind. That you needed to catch up to where I already was. I think, somewhere along the way, I convinced myself that believing that made my own choices feel more secure." Claire studied her sister carefully, sensing genuine vulnerability beneath the admission. "I never needed to catch up to anything, Melissa. I was simply living my own life, in my own way." Melissa nodded slowly, staring out over the water. "I know that now. I think, honestly, some part of me always knew that, but it was easier to believe otherwise." They stood together in silence for several long moments, the tension between them shifting into something quieter, more uncertain, neither fully resolved nor fully repaired. Claire did not offer immediate forgiveness, nor did she demand a fuller apology, simply allowing the moment to exist honestly between them, without forcing it toward premature resolution. "Tomorrow is still your day," Claire said finally, her voice gentle but steady. "Whatever happened tonight, I want you to have a beautiful wedding." Melissa turned to look at her sister, something raw and uncertain flickering across her expression. "Thank you, Claire. I mean that." They returned inside together a few minutes later. The earlier tension between them softened slightly, though clearly not entirely resolved. Claire sensed, walking back into the quietly buzzing restaurant, that whatever unfolded the following day at the wedding itself would carry echoes of tonight's revelation, shaping the atmosphere in ways neither sister could yet fully predict. Later that night, driving home under a sky scattered with stars, Claire replayed the evening slowly in her mind, still trying to fully absorb everything that had happened. She thought about David's sincere gratitude, about her mother's uncertain admission, about Melissa's raw vulnerability on the terrace, and about the quiet warmth she had felt standing beside Nathan earlier in the evening. She did not feel triumphant exactly, nor did she feel fully at peace, simply aware that something significant had shifted within her family, a slow crack forming in years of carefully maintained imbalance. She arrived home and sat for a while in her quiet living room before finally heading to bed, aware that tomorrow would bring its own new set of challenges, but trusting, for the first time in a long while, that she would meet them exactly as herself, without needing to shrink for anyone's comfort ever again. The morning of the wedding arrived bright and clear, sunlight streaming through the tall windows of the bridal suite, where Melissa sat, surrounded by her bridesmaids, hairstylists, and makeup artists, moving efficiently around the room. Despite the previous night's emotional revelations, the day had begun with a fragile, cautious normalcy. everyone focused on the practical tasks required to bring the wedding smoothly to life. Claire arrived early, wearing the mustard-yellow dress without complaint, choosing instead to focus on supporting her sister through the final hours before the ceremony began. She helped organize the bouquets, checked on delivery schedules with the wedding planner, and offered quiet encouragement whenever Melissa's nerves threatened to overwhelm her composure. "You look beautiful," Claire told her sister honestly, watching the makeup artist apply the final touches to Melissa's elegant updo. Melissa met her sister's gaze in the mirror, something softer lingering behind her expression, compared to the sharp confidence she usually projected. "Thank you, Claire, for everything, including last night." "You don't need to thank me," Claire said gently. "I just want today to be everything you've dreamed of." Melissa nodded, though her eyes glistened briefly with unexpected emotion, before she quickly composed herself, allowing the makeup artist to finish her work. The room buzzed with quiet activity for the next hour, tied to dresses being adjusted, final photographs taken, nervous laughter shared among the bridesmaids as the ceremony time approached. As the guests began arriving at the elegant garden venue, Claire took her position among the bridal party, standing near the entrance of the ceremony space, watching family and friends settle into their seats beneath a canopy of soft white flowers. She spotted her mother near the front row, dressed elegantly, her expression carrying a subdued thoughtfulness that Claire had rarely witnessed before. She spotted her grandmother, Margaret, seated confidently near the back, offering Claire a small, encouraging nod, as their eyes met briefly across the growing crowd. She also noticed Nathan among the guests, seated toward the middle rows, having been invited given his friendship with the family through Claire's earlier introduction. He offered her a warm, steady smile as she caught his eye, and Claire felt a small flutter of appreciation at his quiet presence amid the surrounding formality. The ceremony began smoothly, the string quartet, successfully rebooked after the earlier cancellation scare, playing softly as Melissa walked down the aisle on the arm of their uncle, radiant in her wedding gown, her earlier nervous energy replaced now by calm, visible joy. David stood waiting at the altar, his expression warm and genuine as he watched his bride approach, and Claire, standing among the bridal party, felt a small, unexpected lump form in her throat at the quiet sincerity of the moment. The vows exchanged between the couple were simple and heartfelt, David speaking warmly about gratitude, growth, and the unexpected ways life connects people meant to find each other eventually. Claire listened carefully, noticing several guests glancing briefly toward her during his remarks, a quiet acknowledgement of the previous night's revelation, still lingering in the collective memory of those present. Following the ceremony, guests moved toward the reception area, an elegantly decorated tent overlooking manicured gardens, string lights twinkling softly overhead as the sun began its slow descent toward evening. Claire took her seat, no longer near the kitchen entrance as originally planned, but at a reassigned table closer to the center of the room, a quiet adjustment Melissa had apparently made without announcement, sometime after the rehearsal dinner. As dinner service began, conversation flowed easily among the guests, the earlier tension from the previous night gradually softening into genuine warmth and celebration. Claire found herself seated beside Rebecca, who greeted her with an enthusiastic smile. "I still can't stop thinking about last night," Rebecca said. "David hasn't stopped talking about it all day." "I hope it doesn't overshadow the actual wedding," Claire admitted with a small laugh. "Honestly," Rebecca said warmly, "I think it added something meaningful to the whole day. It reminded everyone that real character matters more than appearances." As the meal continued, the time arrived for the toasts to begin, the moment Claire had been quietly anticipating throughout the entire wedding planning process. The wedding planner approached her discreetly, confirming that she was still scheduled to speak, per the original program, though the context surrounding her toast had shifted dramatically since the initial cruel intention behind its assignment. Claire rose from her seat as her name was called, feeling the weight of the room's attention settle upon her, though this time, unlike weeks earlier, when she had dreaded this exact moment, she felt calm, steady, and entirely herself. "I want to start," Claire began, her voice clear and composed, "by saying how proud I am of my sister today. Melissa, you have built something beautiful, and I know the years ahead will be filled with wonderful memories for you and David." She paused, glancing briefly toward her sister, who watched her with an expression of genuine attentiveness, rather than the guarded amusement Claire might have expected months earlier. I was originally asked to speak today about patience, Claire continued, a small, knowing smile crossing her face, drawing a few soft, understanding chuckles from guests who had witnessed the earlier tension surrounding the toast assignment. About waiting for the right time in life. And I think, actually, that's a fitting topic, though perhaps not exactly in the way it was originally intended. She took a steady breath before continuing. I've learned, over the years, that timing rarely follows the paths we expect. Sometimes the right moment for something arrives quietly, without announcement, long before we even realize its significance. A few years ago, I offered some guidance to a struggling business, never imagining that guidance would eventually intersect with my own family in such an unexpected way. That's the strange, beautiful thing about patience. It doesn't always look like waiting. Sometimes it looks like quietly doing good work, trusting that its impact will reveal itself exactly when it needs to. The room listened attentively, several guests exchanging warm, knowing glances as Claire's words settled meaningfully over the gathered crowd. To Melissa and David, Claire finished, raising her glass. May your marriage be filled with the same kind of patience, the quiet, steady kind that builds something lasting, regardless of how the timing unfolds around you. The room erupted into warm applause, glasses raised in unified celebration, and Claire sat back down feeling a deep, settled satisfaction, having reclaimed a moment originally designed to diminish her and transformed it instead into something genuinely meaningful. Melissa approached her sister quietly once the applause subsided, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. That was beautiful, Claire. Thank you. I meant every word, Claire said softly. As the reception continued into the evening, dancing and laughter filling the tent beneath the twinkling lights, Claire found herself drawn gradually into genuine celebration, rather than quiet endurance. She danced briefly with Diane, laughed warmly with Rebecca, and several other guests who approached her throughout the evening, with newfound admiration, and eventually found herself standing near the edge of the dance floor beside Nathan, who had made his way over during a quiet lull in the music. Quite a toast, Nathan said, smiling warmly. I surprised myself, honestly, Claire admitted. I wasn't sure exactly what I'd say until I was standing there. It came from somewhere real, Nathan observed. That's why it landed the way it did. Claire studied him for a moment, appreciating the steady warmth he continued to offer throughout the emotional complexity of recent weeks. Would you like to dance? She asked, surprising herself with the sudden boldness of the invitation. Nathan's smile widened. I'd like that very much. They moved together onto the dance floor as the music shifted into something slow and gentle, and Claire felt, for the first time in longer than she could easily remember, a genuine, uncomplicated happiness settle over her, entirely separate from the tangled family dynamics that had consumed so much of her emotional energy throughout the preceding weeks. Across the room, Linda watched her daughter dancing, a thoughtful expression crossing her face as she sipped a glass of wine beside Aunt Carol. She looks happy, Linda observed quietly, almost to herself. She's always been happy, in her own way, Carol replied, studying her sister with a note of gentle correction in her voice. We just weren't always paying attention to the right things. Linda said nothing, for a long moment, watching Claire laugh softly at something Nathan had said, her posture relaxed and genuine, in a way Linda realized she had rarely allowed herself to notice before. I think I owe her an apology, Linda said finally, her voice quiet with a discomfort that seemed genuinely unfamiliar to her. Maybe more than one, Carol said gently, though not unkindly, but it's a start. Later in the evening, as the dancing slowed and guests began drifting toward dessert tables set up along the edge of the tent, Melissa found a quiet moment to approach her mother near the gift table. Mom, did you know about what Claire did for David's company? Linda shook her head slowly. Not until last night. I had no idea she was even doing that kind of work. Melissa was silent for a moment, staring out at her sister still standing near the dance floor, now deep in conversation with Nathan and Diane. I think I've spent so many years believing certain things about her, about what mattered, about what counted as success, that I never actually stopped to see who she really was. Linda placed a gentle hand on her daughter's arm. I think, in some ways, I taught you to see her that way. I'm sorry for that, Melissa. It wasn't fair to either of you. Melissa looked at her mother, surprised by the rare admission. "It's not too late to change that, is it?" "No," Linda said softly. "I don't think it is." As the evening wound toward its final hours, Claire found herself standing near the edge of the garden, taking a quiet moment away from the celebration, to breathe in the cool night air. Margaret joined her there, leaning lightly on her cane as she settled beside her granddaughter. "You did well today," Margaret said simply. "It didn't go at all the way I expected, honestly," Claire admitted, smiling faintly. "Not the humiliation Melissa originally planned, and not quite the quiet redemption I imagined either. Just something messier and more real than either version." "That's usually how the truest things unfold," Margaret said, patting her granddaughter's hand affectionately. "Rarely as clean as we imagined beforehand, but often exactly as meaningful." Claire smiled, looking back toward the tent, where laughter and soft music continued drifting into the night air, the celebration carrying on around a quiet shift in her family's understanding that would likely continue unfolding long after the wedding day itself had ended. As the last dessert plates were cleared and the band began winding down their final set, David approached Claire near the edge of the garden, his expression warm and slightly formal, as though he had been building up the courage to say something specific throughout the evening. "I wanted to thank you again," he said, properly, without an entire room watching this time. Claire smiled. "You already thanked me plenty last night." "I know," David said, "but I wanted you to hear this part too. Melissa and I talked earlier, after the ceremony. She told me about the seating arrangement, the dress, some of the things said before the wedding. I had no idea any of that had been happening." Claire's expression softened slightly. "It's not something I wanted to bring into your wedding day." "I understand that," David said, "but I want you to know, moving forward, you'll always have a seat at the center of our table, not the edge of it. That's not just a gesture, I mean it." Claire felt an unexpected warmth rise in her chest at his sincerity. "Thank you, David. That means more than you probably realize." He nodded, offering a small, genuine smile, before returning toward Melissa, who stood waiting near the dance floor, watching the exchange with an expression Claire could not fully read, though it seemed, notably, free of her earlier defensiveness. A short while later, as guests began gathering their things to leave, Priya, who had been invited as Claire's +1 earlier in the evening, found her near the gift table, her expression bright with quiet excitement. "I saw you dancing with Nathan," she said, nudging Claire gently. Claire laughed softly. "It was just a dance, Priya." "Sure it was," Priya teased. "But I saw the way he looked at you. That wasn't just a dance kind of look." Claire felt a small, pleased flush rise to her cheeks, though she said nothing further, simply allowing herself, for once, to enjoy the quiet possibility unfolding, without needing to analyze it too deeply in the moment. She glanced across the garden, spotting Nathan speaking with a small group near the exit, and felt a small flutter of anticipation at the thought of what conversations might follow in the days ahead. As the evening finally drew to its close, guests slowly departing amid warm farewells and lingering hugs, Claire stood for a moment near the entrance of the garden, looking back at the tent glowing softly under strings of golden light. She thought about the long, complicated weeks leading up to this day, the seating chart, the mustard yellow dress, the cruel jokes whispered among people who barely knew her, and the quiet, patient unraveling of truth that had ultimately reshaped the entire atmosphere of her sister's wedding. Whatever remained unresolved between her and Melissa, whatever healing still needed to occur within her fractured family, Claire felt, walking toward her car under the quiet night sky, a settled sense of peace, knowing that she had faced the entire ordeal exactly as herself, without ever needing to shrink for anyone else's comfort. 2 weeks after the wedding, Claire sat in her kitchen reading a text message from Melissa that surprised her with its warmth and sincerity. An invitation to lunch, just the two of them, no other family members, no wedding logistics to discuss. Claire stared at the message for a long moment before agreeing, curious but cautiously hopeful about what her sister might have to say. They met at a small cafe near Melissa's new apartment, the honeymoon glow still visible in Melissa's relaxed posture as she settled into the seat across from Claire. For a few minutes, conversation remained light, discussing the honeymoon in brief, pleasant detail, before Melissa finally set down her coffee cup and looked directly at her sister. "I owe you an apology," Melissa said, her voice steady, despite the visible vulnerability behind her words. Not just for the wedding, though certainly for that too, but for years of the way I've treated you." Claire studied her sister carefully, unsure exactly how to respond to such a direct admission after years of accumulated hurt. "I appreciate you saying that. I've been thinking a lot since the wedding," Melissa continued, "about why I always needed to feel ahead of you, why your happiness always seemed to threaten mine somehow. I think, honestly, I was scared that if you were doing well without following the path everyone expected, it meant the path I chose wasn't actually the only right one." Claire considered this carefully, recognizing a kind of honesty in her sister's words that had rarely surfaced between them before. "I never wanted to compete with you, Melissa. I just wanted to live my own life without constantly being measured against yours." "I know that now," Melissa said quietly. "I think I always knew it, somewhere underneath everything, but it was easier to keep believing otherwise. Watching David thank you like that, seeing how many people at that wedding respected you the moment they finally understood who you really were, it forced me to confront something I'd been avoiding for years." Claire felt the weight of years of quiet hurt settling somewhere between forgiveness and lingering caution. "I'm not interested in punishing you for the past, Melissa, but I do need things to be different moving forward." "I understand," Melissa said firmly. "I don't expect everything to be fixed overnight, but I want to try, genuinely." They spent the remainder of the lunch discussing smaller, gentler topics, the conversation carrying a fragile but genuine warmth neither sister had experienced in years. As they parted ways afterward, Melissa hugged her sister tightly, an embrace that felt, for the first time in a long while, entirely sincere rather than performative. Over the following weeks, the family dynamic continued shifting in small, meaningful ways. Linda began calling Claire more frequently, no longer filling their conversations with subtle comparisons to Melissa's life choices, instead asking genuine questions about Claire's work at the hospital, her friendships, and eventually, tentatively, about Nathan, who had begun visiting Claire regularly since the wedding. Their relationship had grown steadily since the reception, moving from quiet hospital lunches toward evening dinners, long conversations about their respective careers, and eventually, weekend outings that left Claire feeling a warmth and ease she had rarely allowed herself to experience in previous relationships. Nathan possessed a steady, grounded quality that complemented Claire's own quiet resilience, neither of them needing grand gestures to feel secure in each other's company. One evening, as they sat together on Claire's small back porch watching the sunset, Nathan reached over and took her hand gently. "I've been meaning to say something," he began, his tone thoughtful. "I've really valued getting to know you these past weeks, beyond just our friendship at the hospital." Claire smiled, feeling a comfortable warmth settle over her. "I've valued it too, Nathan. More than I probably let on at first. I know things have been complicated with your family," Nathan continued carefully. "I don't want to add pressure to that. But I'd like to continue this, whatever this becomes, at whatever pace feels right for you." Claire studied him for a long moment, appreciating the quiet respect embedded in his words. "I'd like that too," she said simply, her voice steady with quiet certainty. Meanwhile, David's gratitude toward Claire continued extending beyond the wedding itself. A month after the ceremony, he approached her with an unexpected proposal, offering her a formal consulting position with his company, one that would allow her to continue nursing part-time, while also applying her logistics expertise on a broader, officially recognized scale. "I've watched you quietly change lives without ever asking for recognition," David told her during their meeting at his office. "I think it's time you had the opportunity to do that work with full acknowledgement and fair compensation for the value you bring." Claire considered the offer carefully, recognizing the significance of finally stepping fully into recognition for skills she had spent years exercising quietly in the background. "I'd like to think about it," she said honestly, "but I'm genuinely grateful for the offer." "Take your time," David said warmly. "Whatever you decide, I want you to know how much your work meant, and continues to mean, to everything I've built." Claire left his office that afternoon feeling a quiet, steady pride settle over her, an acknowledgement finally arriving, not through dramatic confrontation, but through the natural unfolding of genuine gratitude and respect. She thought about accepting the position eventually, recognizing an opportunity to expand her impact while still maintaining the nursing career she deeply loved. Family gatherings in the following months carried a noticeably different atmosphere. During a birthday celebration for Aunt Carol, Claire found herself seated comfortably among the main group rather than pushed toward the periphery, engaged genuinely in conversation rather than subjected to subtle comparisons or dismissive remarks about her personal life. Melissa, present at the same gathering, made a visible effort to include her sister throughout the evening, occasionally checking in with a warmth that felt increasingly natural rather than forced. At one point during the celebration, Grace, the same distant cousin who had once gleefully pointed out Claire's kitchen table seating at the wedding, approached her with an entirely different tone. "I heard about the consulting job offer," Grace said. "That's incredible, Claire. You've really built something impressive." Claire smiled, appreciating the shift in perception, without needing to dwell on the earlier unkindness that had once colored these same family interactions. "Thank you, Grace. I'm excited about the possibilities." As the evening continued, Claire found herself reflecting on the strange, layered journey of the preceding months, the humiliation originally intended by Melissa's wedding preparations, the quiet unraveling of long-buried truth, and the gradual, imperfect healing that had followed in its wake. She recognized that forgiveness, much like the recognition she had finally received, had arrived slowly, through consistent small gestures, rather than a single dramatic reconciliation. Later that evening, as the family gathering wound down, Melissa found a quiet moment alone with her sister near the kitchen, an echo of the earlier wedding seating arrangement that once carried such painful significance. "It's strange," Melissa said softly, "standing here now, remembering where I placed you at the wedding. It feels different now," Claire agreed quietly. "I think I understand now. What Grandma always tried to tell me," Melissa continued. "That real strength doesn't need an audience to prove itself. I spent years thinking your quiet life meant you were somehow behind, when really, you were just building something more solid than anything I was chasing." Claire studied her sister carefully, recognizing the genuine growth reflected in her words. "We're both still figuring things out, Melissa. That's all right." Melissa nodded, offering a small, genuine smile, before the two sisters rejoined the rest of the family, the earlier painful dynamic between them steadily, imperfectly, but genuinely continuing to heal, with each passing gathering. A few days later, Claire drove out to visit her grandmother, wanting to share the recent developments in person, rather than over the phone. Margaret listened carefully, as Claire described the lunch with Melissa, the growing warmth with Nathan, and David's consulting offer, her expression carrying quiet satisfaction throughout the recounting. "I always told you the truth finds its own timing," Margaret said once Claire finished. "But I'll admit, even I didn't expect it to unfold quite this dramatically." Claire laughed softly. "Neither did I, honestly. I thought I'd simply attend the wedding, endure whatever discomfort Melissa had planned, and move on quietly afterward." "Life rarely follows the quiet plans we make for it," Margaret said, smiling. "Especially when we've spent years holding something valuable without ever asking anyone to notice." "Do you think Melissa's changes will last?" Claire asked, genuine uncertainty coloring her voice. "Or will things eventually slip back into old patterns?" Margaret considered the question carefully before answering. "I think real change rarely happens all at once. It happens in small moments, repeated consistently over time. Melissa took her first real steps at that wedding, and she's continued taking them since. Whether she keeps walking that path is something only time will reveal. But I think, for now, you should let yourself trust the progress you're seeing, without needing guarantees about the future." Claire nodded slowly, appreciating her grandmother's steady wisdom. "That feels right." "And this Nathan," Margaret added, her eyes sparkling slightly with curiosity. "When do I get to meet him properly?" Claire smiled, feeling a warm flush rise to her cheeks. "Soon, Grandma. I promise." As the visit continued, Margaret shared old stories from her own younger years, memories of quiet resilience and patient determination that had shaped her own long life. Stories Claire had heard many times before, but which carried new meaning now, given everything she herself had recently experienced. She left her grandmother's house that evening feeling steadied, grateful for the generational wisdom that had guided her through some of the most difficult weeks of her adult life. The following month, Claire officially accepted David's consulting offer, arranging her schedule carefully to balance both her hospital nursing shifts and her growing consulting responsibilities. The transition required careful planning, but she found unexpected fulfillment in applying her logistics expertise more broadly, helping additional struggling businesses navigate financial difficulty using the same careful, patient strategies she had once applied anonymously years earlier. During a quiet dinner celebrating her first month in the new consulting role, Nathan raised a glass toward her with a warm, proud smile. "To finally being seen, for everything you've always quietly been," he said. Claire smiled, clinking her glass against his gently. "To timing," she said softly, "arriving exactly when it needs to, even when we don't expect it." They shared a comfortable, quiet dinner together, the steady warmth between them continuing to deepen naturally with each passing week, free from the dramatic tension that had once defined so much of Claire's family interactions. She felt, sitting there across from him, a settled sense of contentment entirely her own, built not from external validation, but from the quiet, consistent integrity she had maintained throughout even the most difficult chapters of her recent life. A few weeks later, Claire hosted a small dinner at her own house, inviting Melissa and David, Diane, Priya, and Nathan together for the first time. She had hesitated over the guest list for days, uncertain whether mixing these different threads of her life so directly might feel overwhelming, but ultimately decided that the people who mattered most to her deserved to know one another properly. The evening unfolded more easily than she had anticipated. Melissa arrived early, offering to help in the kitchen, something she had rarely done in years past, and the two sisters worked side by side chopping vegetables and setting the table, their conversation light and easy, in a way that would have felt impossible only months earlier. David and Nathan discovered a shared interest in hiking within minutes of meeting, quickly falling into easy conversation about nearby trails, while Priya and Diane traded stories about Claire from opposite corners of her life, comparing notes with obvious delight. At one point during dinner, Melissa raised her glass unexpectedly. "I want to say something," she began, drawing the table's attention. "A year ago, I couldn't have imagined a dinner like this happening, all of us together, this easily. I'm grateful it does now. And Claire, I'm grateful for you, more than I think I've ever properly told you." Claire felt a warmth rise in her chest, glancing around the table at the people who had each, in their own way, supported her through the most difficult chapter of her recent life. "Thank you, Melissa," she said simply. "I'm glad we're here too." The dinner continued late into the evening, laughter filling Claire's small dining room in a way it rarely had before. And as guests eventually began gathering their things to leave, Claire stood at her doorway, watching them go, feeling a quiet, complete sense of gratitude settle over her. She thought about the seating chart, the mustard yellow dress, the whispered jokes at her expense, and the long, difficult months of quiet endurance that had preceded this evening. None of it had disappeared entirely from memory, but it no longer carried the same sharp sting it once had, softened instead by the genuine warmth that had grown steadily in its place. As Nathan lingered behind after the others had left, helping her clear the last of the dishes, he paused and looked at her with quiet affection. "Tonight was good," he said simply. "It was," Claire agreed, smiling. "Better than I expected, honestly." "I think that's becoming something of a pattern for you lately," Nathan said gently. "Things turning out better than you expected." Claire considered his words, recognizing the quiet truth within them. "Maybe I'm finally starting to believe I deserve that." Nathan reached over, taking her hand gently. "You always did, Claire. It just took the rest of the world a little time to catch up." 1 year after the wedding, that had once been designed to quietly diminish her, Claire stood in her kitchen, preparing for a very different kind of family gathering. A first anniversary celebration Melissa had insisted on hosting at her own home, determined to mark the occasion, surrounded by the people who mattered most. Claire smiled to herself as she packed a homemade dessert into a carrier, remembering how different this same season had felt only 12 months earlier. She arrived at Melissa and David's house to find the backyard decorated simply but warmly, string lights strung between the trees, a small table set with fresh flowers, rather than elaborate arrangements. Melissa greeted her at the door with a genuine, easy hug, no trace remaining of the sharp tension that had once colored nearly every interaction between them. "I can't believe it's already been a year," Melissa said, leading Claire inside. "Time moves strangely," Claire agreed, setting the dessert down in the kitchen. "It feels both longer and shorter than that, somehow." Melissa laughed softly. "That's exactly how I'd describe it too." As guests began arriving throughout the afternoon, Claire noticed how naturally she now moved through these family gatherings, no longer bracing herself for subtle slights or dismissive comments about her personal life. Linda arrived early, immediately pulling Claire into a warm embrace, and spent much of the afternoon asking genuine questions about her consulting work and her relationship with Nathan, who arrived a short while later, carrying a bottle of wine and a small gift for the couple. "You two look happy," Linda observed at one point, watching Claire and Nathan across the yard, laughing together over something one of David's colleagues had said. "We are," Claire said simply, feeling no need to elaborate further, comfortable in the quiet certainty of her own happiness, rather than needing her mother's validation to confirm it. Margaret arrived later in the afternoon, moving a little slower than she had the previous year, but carrying the same sharp, observant presence that had guided Claire through so many difficult moments. She settled into a comfortable chair near the garden, watching the gathering with quiet satisfaction. "This feels different," Margaret observed, as Claire brought her a plate of food. "Good different, I hope," Claire said, settling into the chair beside her. "Very good different," Margaret confirmed. "I remember standing at that wedding a year ago, watching you carry yourself with such quiet dignity, despite everything being thrown at you. I wasn't sure, honestly, how things would unfold afterward. But this, watching your whole family gathered here, genuinely happy together, this is more than I expected, even from you." Claire smiled, watching Melissa laugh brightly across the yard as David wrapped an arm around her waist, the two of them clearly settled comfortably into their first year of marriage. "It hasn't been perfect," Claire admitted. "There have been moments where old patterns tried to resurface, small comments here and there. But we've worked through them, mostly. That's how real healing usually looks," Margaret said. "Not perfect, but genuine." As the afternoon shifted into evening, David gathered everyone together for a brief toast, marking the anniversary with simple, heartfelt words about gratitude and the unexpected ways life connects people meant to find each other. He paused partway through his remarks, glancing warmly toward Claire. "I want to acknowledge something again today," David said, "not to make a spectacle of it the way I might have accidentally done last year, but simply because it still means so much to me. Claire, the work you did years ago, the quiet, unglamorous restructuring of a struggling business, gave me the foundation to build everything I have now, including this life with Melissa. I'm endlessly grateful, not just for that work, but for the person you've continued to be throughout this past year, showing all of us what real strength and patience actually look like." The small gathering offered a warm round of applause, and Claire felt a settled, quiet pride rather than the nervous discomfort she might have felt a year earlier standing beneath similar attention. She had grown, she realized, not just in how others perceived her, but in how comfortably she now inhabited her own worth, independent of anyone else's recognition. Later that evening, as the gathering began winding down, Melissa found a quiet moment alone with her sister near the edge of the garden, the same spot where they had shared their first honest conversation the night before the wedding a year earlier. "I've been thinking about starting something," Melissa said, her tone thoughtful. "A small mentorship program, actually. Connecting young women just starting their careers with more experienced professionals willing to offer honest guidance. I want to model it partly on what you did for David, quiet, practical help that changes people's lives without needing recognition." Claire felt a genuine warmth at her sister's idea. "That sounds wonderful, Melissa. I'd be happy to help however I can." "I was hoping you'd say that," Melissa said, smiling. Honestly, I want to build something meaningful now, not just something that looks impressive from the outside. You taught me that distinction, even if it took me far too long to understand it." Claire studied her sister carefully, recognizing the genuine growth reflected in her words. Growth that had continued steadily over the past year, rather than fading as a temporary reaction to a single dramatic revelation. "I'm proud of you," Claire said simply. Melissa's eyes glistened slightly at the words. "That means more to me than you probably realize." They stood together quietly for a few more minutes, watching the string lights flicker gently overhead, the warm hum of family conversation drifting from the garden behind them. Nathan approached a short while later, slipping an arm gently around Claire's waist, and the three of them continued talking easily, the tension that had once defined their family gatherings, replaced now by something steadier and more genuine. As the evening finally drew to its close, and guests began departing amid warm farewells, Claire and Nathan walked slowly to their car together, the night air cool and comfortable around them. Nathan glanced over at her, his expression thoughtful. "A lot has changed in a year," he observed. "It has," Claire agreed, smiling softly. "I think, sometimes, the hardest chapters end up teaching us the most, even when we can't see it clearly while we're living through them." Nathan reached over, taking her hand gently as they walked. "I'm glad I got to see this next chapter with you." Claire looked up at him, feeling a deep, settled contentment carry her through the quiet evening. "So am I," she said simply. Driving home together beneath a sky scattered with stars, Claire reflected on the long journey that had unfolded since that first cruel wedding invitation arrived on her kitchen counter a year earlier. She thought about the seating chart meant to diminish her, the mustard yellow dress chosen to set her apart, the whispered jokes among people who barely knew her, and the quiet, patient truth that had ultimately reshaped everything her family believed about who she truly was. She had never sought recognition for her quiet acts of generosity, never expected the anonymous consulting work of her past to intersect so dramatically with her sister's wedding day. Yet somehow, through patience rather than confrontation, through quiet integrity rather than forced vindication, the truth had found its own way to the surface, transforming a moment designed for humiliation into one of genuine, lasting healing. Claire understood now, more clearly than ever, that her worth had never actually depended on her family's approval, on a wedding ring, or on public recognition of her accomplishments. It had always existed quietly within her, steady and unshaken, waiting patiently for the world around her to eventually catch up. As she settled into the passenger seat beside Nathan, watching the familiar streets pass by under the soft glow of streetlights, Claire felt, at last, entirely at peace with the life she had built, one quiet, meaningful choice at a time, exactly as herself, and exactly enough. In the weeks that followed the anniversary celebration, Claire found herself settling into a rhythm that felt, for the first time in years, entirely uncomplicated. Her mornings began with hospital rounds, her afternoons occasionally split between patient care and her growing consulting responsibilities with David's company, and her evenings increasingly shared with Nathan, whose steady presence had become one of the quiet constants anchoring her days. One afternoon, while reviewing case files for a new consulting client, a small bakery struggling against rising costs and inefficient supply routes, Claire found herself thinking back to those early anonymous consulting days, remembering the careful, patient work of rebuilding something broken, piece by piece. She smiled to herself, recognizing how much had changed since then, not in the nature of the work itself, which still relied on the same careful attention and quiet dedication, but in how openly she now carried that part of her life, no longer hidden behind anonymity, out of necessity, but shared proudly as an integral part of who she was. Melissa's mentorship program launched officially that spring, drawing a modest but enthusiastic group of young women eager for genuine professional guidance. Claire agreed to serve as one of the founding mentors, spending occasional weekend afternoons meeting with young nursing students navigating the early uncertainties of their careers, offering the same steady, practical wisdom that had once guided her own path forward during difficult years. During one such mentorship session, a young nursing student named Olivia asked Claire directly about balancing family expectations with personal ambition, clearly struggling with pressures similar to those Claire herself had once endured. Claire considered the question carefully before answering. "I spent a long time believing my family's expectations defined my worth," Claire said honestly. "It took years, and a fairly dramatic wedding, for me to fully understand that real worth isn't something other people grant you. It's something you build quietly, through consistent, honest effort, regardless of whether anyone else notices right away." Olivia listened intently, nodding slowly. "How did you find the patience for that? Waiting for people to eventually understand?" Claire smiled gently. "Honestly, I didn't wait for anyone to understand. I simply kept living my life the way that felt right to me, and eventually, understanding caught up on its own. That's the part I'd want you to remember. You don't need permission to be proud of the path you're building, even if it looks different from everyone else's expectations." As the mentorship session ended, Claire watched Olivia leave with a visibly lighter step and felt a quiet satisfaction settle over her, recognizing the same patient wisdom once offered to her by her father and grandmother now continuing forward through her own guidance to someone else navigating similarly uncertain terrain. That evening, Claire met Nathan for a quiet dinner at their favorite small restaurant near the hospital, the same place where their friendship had first deepened into something more meaningful during the difficult weeks leading up to Melissa's wedding. As they sat together, sharing quiet conversation over a simple meal, Nathan reached across the table and took her hand. "I've been thinking about something," he said carefully. "About the future. Ours, specifically." Claire felt a small flutter of anticipation, though she kept her expression calm, waiting for him to continue. "I'm not in any rush," Nathan said, smiling gently. "But I wanted you to know, whenever you're ready, for whatever that future looks like, I'm here." Steadily, without needing any particular timeline to prove it means something real. Claire felt a warm, settled certainty spread through her chest, recognizing in his words the same patient, genuine quality that had first drawn her to him months earlier. "I think," she said softly, "I'm finally ready to stop worrying about timelines altogether, and just trust that whatever comes next will arrive exactly when it's meant to." They finished their dinner slowly, lingering over dessert, in no hurry to rush toward whatever came next, comfortable instead, in the quiet, steady certainty of simply being present together. Walking out into the cool evening air afterward, Claire looked up at the stars scattered across the night sky, thinking back one final time to that first cruel invitation that had arrived on her kitchen counter, the seating chart meant to diminish her, and the mustard yellow dress chosen to set her apart. None of it had broken her. If anything, it had revealed, finally and undeniably, exactly the kind of person she had quietly been all along, steady, patient, and unshaken, regardless of how long it took the rest of the world to notice. Claire smiled softly to herself as she walked hand in hand with Nathan toward their car, carrying with her, at last, the full, settled peace of a life built entirely and unapologetically on her own quiet, enduring terms.